Chapter 2946. Su Yu said in a dignified voice, "Pass on the order of the Palace of Heaven, order all living beings of the abandoned civilization to kill the members of the Skull Unit." The vast voice blended into the waves and spread throughout the entire abandoned civilization. From the nearby ruins to the Nine-Star civilization, everyone heard the summons from the Great Seal of the Heavenly Law. What? The order of the Palace of Heaven? How could that be? The Palace of Heaven is a Nine-Star civilization. Why would they summon the forces of an abandoned civilization? Could it be that the Nine-Star civilization is finally paying attention to us? No matter what, this is an order from the Palace of Heaven. If we respond to it, there will only be benefit. It had to be said that any Nine-Star civilization's aristocratic family had an unparalleled appeal to the abandoned civilization's living beings. In an instant, all living beings responded to the call. Even the ancient sages, who had been in seclusion, began to surround and kill the Skull Unit after some hesitation. As for the members of the Skull Unit, Su Yu marked their identities with the 8 great domains above their heads. When the entire abandoned civilization began to move, their destruction would happen sooner or later. With the Blackwater civilization as the center, Su Yu gathered tens of thousands of demonic beasts and released the living beings within the Nightmare Crossing Lotus Throne. With this as the center, he began to build the first great force of the abandoned civilization. There were not many experts in the abandoned civilization. The strongest force, the Skull Unit, had been destroyed. The Cauldron was the undisputed number 1 force outside of the Nine-Star civilization. It seems like we will be very busy from now on. The sinful lady sensed the auras of the experts coming from all directions. Her eyes were filled with relief. After this battle, the Cauldron had completely established its position. Even if it did not deliberately recruit people, there would still be people coming from all directions to join it. Su Yu let out a long sigh and said, "Nine-Star civilization, I will be coming soon." Only by entering the Nine-Star civilization as a senior Cauldron would he be qualified to compete with the Sacred Mountain Emperor. His intuition told him that the day of the decisive battle with the Sacred Mountain Emperor was not far away. Time passed by slowly. In the blink of an eye, several months had passed. It had been 3 months since the Palace of Heaven issued the order. The heroes of the abandoned civilization gathered together and launched the final extermination operation against the Skull Unit. The Skull Unit, which normally caused the living beings of the abandoned civilization to tremble in fear, had become dogs that were beaten up by everyone. One by one, the heads were brought to the Cauldron by the people who answered the summons. After witnessing the power of the Cauldron, as well as the ability of the Cauldron to grant them the identity documents of the Nine-Star civilizations, one could imagine how many people wanted to join the Cauldron. Of course, the Cauldron wouldn't refuse anyone. Only those at the level of Tao Lord and above, who were willing to accept the soul search and prove that they were not evil people, would have the qualifications to enter. Even so, the number of people recruited was still an astronomical figure. It was said that there were 10,000 members of the Cauldron. They worked day and night for a whole month and barely finished the work. The number was simply incalculable. Based on preliminary estimates, the number of personnel the Cauldron expanded was more than 10,000 times the original number. The sinful lady looked at the entire space storage device registration register and could not help but be surprised. With such a number, I'm afraid it's even bigger than the Temple of Heaven. The Temple of Heaven was known as the aristocratic family with the largest number of members among the Nine-Star civilizations. This was because it did not care about one's background or race. As long as one's cultivation reached the level of the Master of the Heaven Law, they could enter the Temple of Heaven after passing a simple test. However, right now, the number of people in the Cauldron far exceeded the number of people in the Temple of Heaven. If all these people are put into the Nine-Star civilization, I'm afraid it will bring an unimaginable impact to the entire civilization, the sinful lady murmured. Although their strength was generally not strong, they won in terms of numbers. If they gathered into a single force, wouldn't the Temple of Heaven have to retreat? They can't enter the 9-star civilization for the time being, Suyu said. The statue that was engraved with the official documents was about to shatter due to overuse. Moreover, the number of space storage devices was extraordinarily large. No matter how many space storage devices there were, it was impossible to bring all of them into the 9-star civilization. Therefore, they could only be left outside for the time being, waiting for Suyu to get new statues and make official documents for them one by one. The power has just been formed, and we need to rule the entire abandoned civilization as soon as possible. We need to strive to bring all of them under our control except for the 9-star civilization, Suyu said. The sinful lady pondered and said, "Leave it to me." At present, only 1/10 of the influences had come to seek refuge with the Cauldron. The rest of the influences were entrenched in their own areas. It would take a lot of time to conquer them. Thank you. Suyu cupped his hands in obeisance. Next, it was time to lead the people of the Lotus of Passing Evil Lotus Throne, who had obtained the official documents, to the 9-star civilization and establish a powerful family. Only then could he cooperate with the Temple of Heaven, obtain the opportunity to use the Yin-Yang Gate, and take back his body. But before he left, Suyu would not forget one person. With a flash of his figure, he once again appeared in the former Wenyuan city. Ever since Suyu had flown into a rage and wiped out all living beings within a 10,000-mile radius, the place had turned into a deathly silent land. No living beings dared to approach it. Although he had left that day, he did not dare disturb Mo Heng's training. Mo Heng could not be disturbed while he was crafting the great scythe of 10,000 calamity. Now that the Skull Team had been dealt with, he could finally inquire about the progress of the great scythe of 10,000 calamity. According to Mo Heng, he only needed half a year. Calculating the time, it had been exactly half a year since the great scythe of 10,000 calamity had been handed to him. Mo Heng. Suyu came to the front of the secret chamber and cupped his fist. But there was no response from within the secret chamber. Suyu opened his eyes and immediately activated his soul eyes. In the end, the secret chamber was empty. His heart thumped, and he immediately kicked open the stone door. Mo Heng was long gone, and the great scythe of 10,000 calamity was nowhere to be seen. You lied to me? Suyu stood at his original position, his eyes filled with killing intent. His first thought was that Mo Heng coveted the great scythe of 10,000 calamity and had taken it away while Suyu was dealing with the Skull Team. But thinking about it carefully, he felt that this was not the case. He had never judged a person wrongly. He was confident in Mo Heng's character. But why had Mo Heng silently escaped with his great scythe of 10,000 calamity? Suyu hoped that he was wrong, that someone had taken the opportunity to kidnap Mo Heng. But from the traces at the scene, there were no signs of a fight. Mo Heng, you better give me an explanation, Suyu muttered, clenching his teeth. He struck his chest, spitting out a mouthful of blood. The droplet of blood turned into a blood mist, forming an arrow in midair, pointing in the direction of the 9-star civilization. The great scythe of 10,000 calamity was an item that Suyu had once refined, and it contained a shred of his blood essence. No matter how far away it was, he could use the blood essence to determine its approximate location. Those who belong to the Cauldron, follow me, Suyu shouted. Many ordinary people immediately rode on demonic beasts and followed Suyu to the 9-star civilization in a mighty manner. Chapter 2947. At that time, the Goddess Clan. A fragrant aroma permeated the air, and there were indescribably beautiful women everywhere. They gathered together like orioles and swallows. Patriarch, why did you suddenly summon us? A beautiful woman with green eyes and a cold expression walked over with a slight frown. Her arrival caused the chattering women to fall silent. Their eyes were filled with fear and dread towards her. She was the young matriarch of the goddess clan, Yuzhishan. To be exact, she was the former young matriarch. After Xia Jingyu's arrival, the position of young matriarch changed hands. As the clone of heavenly Prince Mirrorflower, one could imagine how high her position was. Naturally, she became the young matriarch. Speak. Yuzhishan was displeased. Are you treating me like heir because I've been traveling outside for hundreds of years? She left the goddess clan in a fit of anger after her position as young matriarch was snatched away. She traveled outside and finally returned recently. Just now, she heard the matriarch summon and finally showed herself. After hundreds of years, Yuzhishan was even more beautiful than before. It was just that there was a trace of coldness on her face. A clansman who used to be on good terms with her said, "Zhishian, it's about the ancient cave of enchantment." She tactfully closed her mouth after she finished speaking. When Yuzhishan was stripped of her position, she expressed her dissatisfaction and went to the ancient cave of enchantment with Xia Jingyu to take the test of heaven's will. In the end, she suffered a crushing defeat and completely lost her position. Now, after 100 years, the first mission she faced was actually the ancient cave of enchantment. It was unknown whether it was a coincidence or a deliberate action. The ancient cave of enchantment. Yuzhishan's expression became quite strange. She seemed to be in pain but also expectant. It was obvious that Yuzhishan had calculated that the ancient cave of enchantment was about to begin. After hearing this, the rest of the clansmen silently stepped aside for fear of getting close to Yuzhishan. Because no one would forget that when Yuzhishan lost her position as young matriarch, she attracted a heavenly fire and burned the most important altar of the goddess clan. Fortunately, the clan's almighty discovered it in time and extinguished the heavenly fire, saving the altar from disaster. But even so, it still caused the 100 or so clansmen guarding the altar to be buried in the sea of fire, creating an irreparable disaster. Among them, Xia Jingyu, who had just become the young clan leader, was supposed to be cultivating on the altar that day. However, due to her unwell body, she was not there. Thus, she was able to survive. The original intention was obvious. From then on, Yuzhishan took advantage of the fact that the higher-ups of the clan didn't have the time to punish her and betrayed the goddess clan. This was a scandal of the goddess clan that hadn't been spread in 100 years. It was announced to the public that Yuzhishan had gone out to travel, but in reality, only her clansmen knew that Yuzhishan hadn't gone out to travel, but had betrayed the goddess clan. Otherwise, why would the clan members be so afraid of her if she was only out traveling? What the clansmen couldn't understand was that as a traitor, Yuzhishan had actually returned to the goddess clan several months ago, accompanied by the higher-ups of the clan. Could it be that the more than 100 clansmen she had burned to death back then had died in vain? Could it be that the hatred of the past was written off just like that? Many of the clansmen objected to this. However, the higher-ups warned the clansmen not to do anything that would harm Yuzhishan. The clansmen were indignant about this, but they were also extremely helpless. Won't that Xia Jingyu be in the limelight for a while? The corner of Yuzhishan's mouth hooked into a mocking smile. As the young clan leader, she had to participate in the ancient cave of enchantment. Moreover, there would be many clansmen helping her, and she would obtain unimaginable benefits from it. Many of the clansmen were silent, and no one agreed. "Young clan leader, I'll be one of your 7 stars emissaries this time." "Me too." "There's still me." A group of chattering voices could be heard. He glanced sideways and saw 7 smiling young women dressed in jade-green clothes. They were currently surrounding a beautiful woman in an elegant white dress, and they had come to the garden to gather. Her appearance was extremely beautiful, and she blossomed with a brilliance that didn't belong to this world. The sun, moon, and stars merged into one, and the flowers, plants, and trees lost their beauty because of her appearance. She stood there, and even though she didn't move or show any expression, it was enough to suppress all the beautiful things in the world and make them lose their luster. It was as if she was born to be the center of the world, and she possessed an incomparably noble status. There was only one person in the world who could be like this, and that was Xia Jingyu. Yu Zhixian's gaze had long since been fixed on Xia Jingyu. She looked at that familiar and beautiful face that made her jealous, and her heart ached faintly. It was as if she remembered the drastic change that was carved into her bones and heart all those years ago. Xia Jingyu sensed something, and she cast her gaze over. As a result, her elegant brows lightly wrinkled. She had been in seclusion ever since she returned from the last gathering, and she still didn't know that Yu Zhixian had already returned. What? Are you surprised or surprised? Yu Zhixian cast a provocative gaze at her. Xia Jingyu's expression was indifferent, and she was neither happy nor sad. Since you appeared here, there must be a reason for your appearance. Why should I be surprised? In fact, she had never reported to the higher-ups of the clan that Yu Zhixian had done even more excessive things to her. For example, she had tried to drug her unconscious and give her to a man from the outside world to defile her in order to destroy her qualifications to become the young clan leader. Xia Jingyu had unintentionally snatched the position of the young clan leader, and she was originally apologetic. Her heart softened for a moment, and she concealed what she had done. She didn't expect that not only did her concession not reform the other party, but it also brought about an even more severe retaliation, to the extent that more than 100 clansmen were buried in a sea of fire. Yu Zhixian's eyes flickered with coldness. This desireless appearance of yours is really annoying. Back then, you relied on this kind of expression to capture the favor of the higher-ups, right? The clansmen couldn't help but become angry, and they glared at her one after another. The 7 Stars Protector even reprimanded in a stern voice, "Yu Zhixian, don't go too far. You bastard, you still have the face to mention what happened back then? Traitor, what qualifications do you have to criticize our young clan leader?" Yu Zhixian's fierce words attracted the anger of the entire clan, and in the blink of an eye, Yu Zhixian was drowned in their spit. Not only was there no guilt or fear on Yu Zhixian's face, but she even sneered calmly. "Yes, I burned 100 clansmen to death, but so what? Do you dare to touch a single hair on my head?" The clansmen only dared to be angry, but they didn't dare to say anything. They could only firmly stare at Yu Zhixian. Where was the slightest bit of repentance from her tone? Why would the higher-ups of the clan forgive this kind of person? "You don't dare to move, right?" A deranged sneer appeared in Yu Zhixian's eyes. "Since you don't dare to move, then shut up and don't be noisy." How insolent was her attitude! She turned to look at Xia Jingyu, and she didn't bother to conceal her threat. "Young clan leader, I'm afraid you won't be as lucky as before in this ancient cave of enchantment." After she finished speaking, she left with her hands behind her back. Chapter 2948. Yu Zhixian had once used extreme methods in the ancient cave of enchantment and almost caused his death. She was lucky. Yu Zhixian had prepared in a hurry, so she wasn't able to deal a fatal blow, giving her a chance to turn the tables. Now that the other party had made a comeback, he would probably have learned his lesson and would definitely not let this opportunity slip by. "Young clan chief, don't worry. We will protect you this time. We will absolutely not let Yu Zhixian have her way," a 7-star bodyguard said. However, the female clansman who had just spoken to Yu Zhixian slightly shook her head. "Young clan leader, Yu Zhixian has come prepared this time. You'd better prepare yourself early. Don't count on 7-star bodyguards." Are you questioning our strength?" The 7 Stars Protector frowned. Every 7-star protector was a young peak expert that was carefully selected from the clan. This was because the Heart Enchantment Ancient Cave had an extremely high requirement for one's cultivation age. Only those who had cultivated for 300 years or less had the qualifications to enter. Those who were slightly older than him would be lost in the ancient cave of bewilderment forever, never to return. This was not an exaggeration, but a fact. There were more than 1 or 2 great sage-level experts who didn't believe in heresy. However, none of them came back, and it was unknown how angry they were. Some people said that they had died in the many dangers of the cave, but others said that they were still lost inside, and were still looking for a way out. Therefore, creatures over 300 years old didn't dare to enter. The 7 star guards were young experts selected from living beings below the age of 300. 6 of them had reached Heaven's Tao Lord intermediate stage, and the last one was on the verge of becoming an ancient sage. He was one of the strongest prodigies of the goddess tribe in many years. Xia Jingyu, on the other hand, was a genius expert who was a mid-stage heavenly Tao Lord. In theory, there was no need to fear the other party. It's not that I'm doubting your strength, but all of you simply don't know what Yu Zhixian experienced during the 100 years she left. After that clansman finished speaking, he closed his mouth as if he was deeply afraid of being implicated. He didn't know what had caused her expression to change like this. Seeing Zhang Xian stammering, the 7 stars guard thought nothing of it. You're boosting the morale of others and diminishing the might of your own. Xia Jingyu, on the other hand, fell into deep thought. She didn't think that the clansman's words were baseless. Jingyu, come here. Suddenly, an old voice came from the garden. Many of the clansmen were shocked. It was the great elder. Xia Jingyu did not dare to hesitate. She immediately went to the place where the great elder was cultivating in seclusion. Jingyu greets the great elder. Xia Jingyu bowed. In the flowering shrubs in front of her sat an old man in a red robe, cultivating. Hearing those words, Zhang Xian immediately stopped his cultivation and revealed an amiable look. You're here. Xia Jingyu nodded, feeling very strange in her heart. Ever since the last gathering at the border, the great elder seemed to have changed into a different person. In the past, the great elder often spoke coldly to her and often forced her to go to gatherings with men of status. But ever since the last time, not only did he not make any requests, he even rejected all the young elites who came to visit him, not allowing them to harass him. The drastic change left Xia Jingyu scratching her head in confusion. How could she have known that Su Yu had threatened the great elder with the identity of Heavenly Jewel Mirror, which was why she had changed her mind? Great elder, what instructions do you have for me? Xia Jingyu asked. The great elder's amiable face became much more serious as he said, I'm sure you already know about Yu Zhixian's return. In response, Xia Jingyu nodded. The great elder's face was solemn as he said, Yu Zhixian is no longer who she used to be. Even the goddess clan has to be wary of her and dare not offend her. Xia Jingyu's heart sank. Indeed. 100 years had passed. What had Yu Zhixian obtained that made the goddess clan wary of her? We brought her back purely because we had no other choice, the great elder said, as if he was explaining to Xia Jingyu, afraid that she would misunderstand. Xia Jingyu said, I understand the clan's difficulties. The goddess clan was just a large family that had been struggling to survive in the cracks all year round. Even though they had once posed a great threat to Su Yu, in reality, they were nothing in the 9-star civilizations. Therefore, the goddess clan had always held an attitude of not easily offending other influences. Yu Zhixian's return must have caused the goddess clan a lot of frustration. Ah, it's good that you understand. The great elder sighed. However, we will not leave her alone. In addition to sending people to keep an eye on her, we will also send 7 star guards to guard you. Xia Jingyu listened quietly. The great elder had specially summoned her not just to talk about useless things. In addition, we are also looking for suitable personnel to protect you in the bewitching ancient cave, the great elder said seriously. She was not optimistic about the 7 star guards either, so she needed external help. Of course, if you have better personnel, we will consider your request first, the great elder said. Xia Jingyu shook her head and said, I will listen to the great elder's instructions. She had been in isolation all year round. How could she know better personnel? The great elder said, All right, let us know if you have any requests. After a pause, the great elder took out an invitation and said, The main hall of the Palace of Heaven has invited us to participate in a bathing ceremony. It is good for improving soul strength. This opportunity is reserved for you. Prepare to leave soon." Xia Jingyu took the invitation and said gratefully, "Thank you, great elder." Her soul was a little weak and needed to be replenished. Back to Su Yu. He led the people to the entrance of the 9-star civilization in a mighty manner. One could imagine the grandeur of the scene. The stone men guarding the entrance were all shocked. They thought it was wanderers who had trespassed into the 9-star civilization. However, upon inspection, they were shocked to find that all of them had real documents. Moreover, they were personally issued by the number 1 aristocratic family, the Palace of Heaven. There was no doubt about their identities. Therefore, despite their shock, they could only let them pass. Because of the large number of people, it took them half a month to pass through together. For a while, the entrance was completely blocked. When the last person passed through, all the stone men were exhausted. The giant golden python in the passage had been mostly damaged due to continuous work. "Guards." The leader of the stone men, the black-robed man who was at the peak of the ancient sage level, yelled, "Inform the Palace of Heaven of what happened here." Yes, Su Yu had finally led the people to the 9-star civilization in broad daylight. Feeling the incomparably rich Taoist energy here and the incomparably prosperous world, the people were all excited. Even the wilderness of the 9-star civilization is better than the good spiritual land we used to have. If I were born here, why would my cultivation level be so low? It's not too late now. As long as I train harder, I will definitely be able to break through to the Path Master level in my lifetime. All the people were celebrating. They had finally witnessed the legendary 9-star civilization with their own eyes. Chapter 2949. However, this was only the first step. Ding had indeed come to a 9-star civilization, but it did not even have a stronghold. "Cauldron Venerable, how about we establish a force here?" A middle-ranking Cauldron Venerable suggested. The spiritual chi in this place was indeed something they had never seen before in their lives, and it gave them a huge shock. Su Yu's eyes flickered. "This place? Your requirements are too low. What good places does Cauldron Zun have?" The higher-ups asked again, guessing that Su Yu might have a better, undiscovered spiritual land. However, if he knew that the entire 9-star civilization had been occupied by countless ancient factions for countless years, and any good spiritual land had already been occupied, there would not be anything left. "I do have a good place to go, but I will need to fight a fierce battle." Su Yu's eyes were filled with fighting spirit. He did have a good place to go, and that was the territory of the Sword Sacred Tribe. That place was built in an ancient battlefield that no one could go to. Not only were very few living beings able to step into it and threaten the stronghold, but there were also a few living beings that could enter it. More importantly, since the Sword Sacred Clan had chosen that place as their base, it must be because the spiritual energy there was extremely rare. Think about it, a grotto heaven that was not disturbed by any living beings or dangers, and it was also a rare paradise. Where else in the entire 9-star civilization could find a second one like this? Of course, the most important thing was that the Sword Sacred Clan had been destroyed by the human-shaped tribulation fire, and the clan's vitality had been greatly damaged. It was the best time to take him down. However, now was clearly not the time. None of the 5 great sages of the famed Sword Sacred Clan had perished. If they were to retaliate, the consequences would be unimaginable. For the time being, we will set up camp in the vicinity, and don't have any conflicts with any of the nearby factions, Su Yu said. We will wait patiently for some time, and when the time comes, we will occupy that place. The Cauldron's members had unlimited trust in Su Yu, so they carried out his orders without the slightest doubt. A group of common people immediately set up camp nearby and settled down. Su Yu, what do you plan to do next? The sinful lady looked at the vast 9-star civilization and was momentarily stunned, not knowing what to do. Suyu took a deep breath and said, "There are many things that need to be done. Even retrieving the 10,000 calamity scythe was a long way off, not to mention rescuing the absolute beginning realm lifeforms that Xiongqi had taken away. However, there was no need to worry about the 10,000 calamity scythe for now. It could sense Su Yu's presence, and the connection between them could not be broken. What was important was the Yin-Yang Gate. According to Bai Shui, only those who had completed the Temple of Heaven's mission were qualified to use the Yin-Yang Gate. In order to accept the mission, the lowest level of strength was an aristocratic family. "Let's first appraise the overall strength of our cauldron," Suyu said. The 9-star civilizations had an organization that specialized in evaluating the strength of a certain group, and that was the Golem Palace. The Golem Palace was a palace controlled by the descendants of the stone-birth Son of Heaven. It was involved in various cities of the 9-star civilizations. Its purpose was to test the strength of the world's experts. As long as one's strength reached a certain standard, they would receive a reward from the Stone Man Palace. Moreover, the process did not cost them anything. Therefore, many beings from the 9-star civilizations were especially passionate about this. In order for a power to pass the assessment and become an aristocratic family, it had to pass the Golem Palace's test. There were 3 conditions for becoming a noble family. Firstly, the leader had to be at least an ancient sage. Secondly, there had to be at least 3 people who had reached the mid-stage of the Tao of Heaven. Finally, the number of Tao Lords in the faction must be more than 3,000. Only then would they have the qualifications to call themselves an aristocratic family. Not a single one of these conditions could be lacking. None of these 3 conditions could be omitted. Of course, not all 3 conditions could be met to become an aristocratic family. This was because the Golem Palace only allowed one aristocratic family to be established every month. Among all the forces that had passed the assessment that month, the most outstanding would be chosen to become an aristocratic family. Of course, the Cauldron perfectly met all 3 conditions. In particular, the first and third conditions were superior to most of the aristocratic families. Apart from everything else, Suyu had the absolute strength to kill a great saint with a single stroke of his sword. As for the Pathmasters, there were more than 3,000 of them. Suyu scanned his surroundings and locked his eyes on the nearest city to him. He led a group of Cauldron members into the city for the test. Such a large group of people entered the city, but they were not affected in the slightest. This was because the city was too vast. 30,000 people entering the city did not cause the slightest ripple. The prosperity of the city was incomparable to the 8-star civilizations of the past. Therefore, the members of the Cauldron were extremely curious about everything and were amazed. When he arrived at the Golem Palace, Suyu was slightly surprised to find that the Cauldron was not the only force that had come for the additional test. There were already 2 forces waiting outside the Golem Palace, whose doors were tightly shut. Suyu gave them a cursory glance and frowned. The 2 forces had completely met the standards of the aristocratic families. Whether it was the ancient saints, 3 middle-stage heavenly law masters, or 30,000 strong heavenly law masters, they had far exceeded the requirements. There are so many strong men in the 9-star civilizations, Suyu could not help but sigh. This was a city that had been randomly chosen, but he had actually encountered 2 forces that had met the requirements to compete for becoming an aristocratic family. The arrival of the Cauldron naturally aroused the vigilance of the 2 great forces. However, when they noticed that most of the members of the 30,000 Cauldron were early-stage heavenly law masters, they heaved a sigh of relief. Moreover, the behavior of the members of the Cauldron looking around curiously had attracted their contempt. Where did this beggar force come from? How dare they come to apply for becoming an aristocratic family? Maybe it's a small faction that got lucky and developed. The 2 forces had a tacit understanding to denigrate the Cauldron together. In the 9-star civilizations, even the aristocratic families had differences in strength. The powerful aristocratic families had the support of great saint-level forces. One of the two forces in front of them was a direct relative of the Saint clan. It was a family established by itself, and was preparing to be independent. The other force was one of the vassal forces of the Saint clan. With the support of the Saint clan, it was preparing to apply for becoming an aristocratic family. The Cauldron had appeared out of nowhere, and its overall level was relatively low, far inferior to their mysterious force. I say, where do we come from? Why do we need you to talk so much? Suyu was too lazy to argue with them. However, it did not mean that the members of the Cauldron could take it lying down. Hey! The members of the two great forces immediately cast a threatening look at him. Where did this wild monk come from? How dare he behave atrociously in Tianzhou City? Perhaps you should find out who we are. I advise you to give up as soon as possible. Don't waste your energy. They obviously wanted to exclude the Cauldron to reduce the competition. Chapter 2950. Of course we are ready. The leaders of the two forces looked solemn, then looked at Suyu with a faint smile. But we don't know if they are ready. The person who opened the door of the Stone Man Palace was expressionless. What do you need to say if they are ready? After suffering a setback, the leaders of the two factions immediately shut their mouths obediently with embarrassed expressions. The Stone Man Palace was not just any other place. It was the land of Ho-E, the son of the Holy Mountain. If they caused trouble here, it was very likely that the son of the Holy Mountain would hear about it. If the son of the Holy Mountain showed any dissatisfaction, what awaited them would be a doomsday-like execution. Therefore, they immediately behaved themselves and did not dare to act rashly. They did not even dare to look at Suyu casually, for fear of incurring the dissatisfaction of the Stone Man Palace. Are you ready? The person who opened the door asked again. Suyu said calmly, Yes, we are ready. The Stone Man nodded. Come in. The door of the Stone Man Palace opened completely. The three forces, guided by the Stone Man, washed up and entered the Great Hall. The Stone Man Palace was self-contained, but it was not huge. There was only a huge stone platform that could accommodate tens of thousands of people. There was a huge statue of a stone man on the stone platform. Judging from the statue, it was none other than Prince Xiaoyao. Staring at the gloomy stone statue, Su Yu's eyes slowly narrowed. Among the 10 great emperors of the Holy Mountain, he had the deepest grudge with Prince Xiaoyao. He had sent his doppelgangers to kill Su Yu twice. However, it was a pity that Su Yu managed to evade the deadly pursuit again and again. Moreover, he even managed to destroy both of the opponent's clones. So far, his first doppelganger had not been successfully restored. One could imagine the deep hatred between the two sides. To be honest, Su Yu was a little worried that the test might not be a smooth one at the Stone Man Palace where his statue was erected. As you can see, the test is divided into 3 stages. The first stage is the test of the Master of the Heavenly Law. All 30,000 people must reach the level of the Master of the Heavenly Law, not one missing. The other 2 forces indicated that there was no problem. Su Yu's eyes flashed and he nodded confidently. Okay, let's start with the King of Hell, the Stone Man said indifferently. The so-called King of Hell was the vassal force of the Holy Clan. Their strength completely met the requirements of the great families. Under the leader's command, the 30,000 examinees came to the arena one after another. Before the test, let me warn you first. If your strength hasn't reached the level of a heavenly law lord, you'd better step down. Otherwise, your life will be in danger once the test begins. The leader of the Netherworld Kings hesitated for a moment before gritting his teeth and saying, There's absolutely no problem. The golem nodded and said, Okay, let the test begin. With a command, purple flames immediately appeared around the ring. Upon seeing this item, the 30,000 members of the Netherworld Kings Association who were waiting to be tested couldn't help but panic. The Heavenly Law Master's Flame. The so-called Heavenly Law Master's flame was somewhat similar to the heavenly flame that appeared when Suyu broke through to the Heavenly Law Master level. It was just that the power would undoubtedly be much stronger. An expert like Tao Lord Fei Tian would not be able to withstand it. It seemed that not all of them were masters of the Heavenly Law. There was still a certain proportion of them who were impostors. The Nether King signaled them with his eyes to calm them down. Only then did the panicking crowd quietly calm down. They definitely understood the danger of the power assessment. Since they dared to come, they must have made preparations. They quickly calmed down and huddled close to each other. At that moment, the Heavenly Law Master's flame had already spread, burning the whole ring. The Masters of the Heavenly Law immediately groaned in pain. Even though they were Masters of the Heavenly Law, enduring the Heavenly Law flame was still excruciating. Even they were in pain, let alone those whose cultivation hadn't reached the level of a Master of the Heavenly Law. To them, this was a devastating injury. One of them, who hadn't reached the level of a Master of the Heavenly Law, was immediately set ablaze and turned into a flaming man. This was the result of being injured by the heavenly flame because his cultivation hadn't reached the standard. However, just as he was about to be burned to ashes, the heavenly flame became much weaker. It turned out that a part of it had been absorbed by his companions who were next to him. His companion was the Master of the Heavenly Law, so absorbing part of the heavenly flame wouldn't cause him much harm. Moreover, there was more than one Master of the Heavenly Law beside the flaming man. His companions were all absorbing the heavenly flame, which minimized the damage they had suffered. As expected, with the help of his companions, the heavenly flame on this person's body was completely absorbed, and he was spared from death. In fact, there were more than 30,000 people in the ring. At least thousands of them had not reached the level of a Master of the Heavenly Law, and they had relied on this cheating method to achieve great success. When the Netherworld King saw this, a hint of delight appeared on his face. As expected, they had completely understood the testing method of the ring. Many forces had relied on this method to become powerful families. After all, it wasn't easy to gather 30,000 Masters of the Heavenly Law. Therefore, they had to use some improper method. However, just as the Netherworld King was feeling happy, a sudden change occurred. The heavenly flame on the ring suddenly erupted with power, which was twice as powerful as before. Many of the examiners were caught off guard, and they were immediately engulfed by the incomparably fierce heavenly flame. The power of this fire was so strong that even the real Master of the Heavenly Law had reached his limit. He couldn't even take care of himself, let alone help others. Those powerhouses whose cultivation hadn't reached the level of a Master of the Heavenly Law were immediately set ablaze. For a moment, screams filled the air. The sudden eruption of the heavenly flame quickly calmed down, leaving behind a pile of ashes. 4,000 to 5,000 fake Masters of the Heavenly Law were all burned to ashes. The Netherworld King stood rooted to the ground, and his mind went blank. How could this be? Didn't they verify countless times that the Golem Palace could indeed use this method to cheat? Why did the heavenly flame suddenly erupt? At that moment, the stone man said expressionlessly, "I forgot to tell you that the heavenly flame on the ring has changed." Looking at the dazed Netherworld King, the stone man announced, "Netherworld King, you have failed the test. You can't meet the requirements of a powerful family." Everyone felt uneasy after witnessing this scene. The cauldron was the most uneasy one. How could they not know how powerful the cauldron was? Where could they find 30,000 Masters of the Heavenly Law? They didn't even have 30 of them, let alone 30,000. This was the cauldron's current situation. It didn't have enough Masters of the Heavenly Law. The sinful woman couldn't help but worry for Suyu. Others couldn't even cheat if they were only a few thousand Masters of the Heavenly Law, let alone them. However, Suyu was still as calm as before. He said, "Different situations call for different actions. I have my ways. Don't be impatient." The members of the cauldron forced themselves to calm down and observed the situation quietly. Chapter 29:51. Hearing this, the previously arrogant and despotic force immediately felt guilty. The Netherworld King lacked enough Heaven Law Masters, but so did he. It was just that he didn't lack 5,000 Heaven Law Masters like the Netherworld King. The leader of the opposing force gritted his teeth and said, "Then let me, Ling Yun, do it." He was a direct descendant of a sacred clan, so he naturally had more resources than the former. Ling Yun's members panicked, and about 1,000 of them became nervous and uneasy. If the Netherworld King's 5,000 members were annihilated so easily, how could they dare to go up? "With me, Qing Mu, here, what are you afraid of?" Qing Mu shouted. Ling Yun's members had no choice but to go up. All 30,000 of them stood on the arena. The stone man said expressionlessly, "I repeat, the first test is very dangerous. Any injuries or deaths will be at your own risk." Qing Mu nodded and said, "Ling Yun understands. Please." The stone man nodded and activated the mechanism of the arena. Instantly, the Heaven Law Master's flames started to spread around the arena. The 30,000 members took in a deep breath. Unlike the Netherworld King, the members of Ling Yun's team were spread out as if they weren't cheating at all. At this moment, the heavenly fire finally spread over and engulfed everyone at an extremely fast speed. About 1,000 of them were immediately engulfed in flames, turning them into burning men. However, the strange thing was that they didn't feel any pain. Instead, they acted as if nothing had happened. After burning for a while, the heavenly fire on their bodies was automatically absorbed into their bodies. On the other hand, the other 290,000 people had painful expressions on their faces, and their bodies were faintly red. If one looked closely, they would find that there were wooden patterns on their bodies, as if they were all tree stumps. It turned out that this was the divine ability of the sacred clan that Qing Mu belonged to. It could lignify all nearby objects and living beings, and form a cohesive whole. The 30,000 people were like an ancient tree with 30,000 roots. 1,000 of them were affected by the heaven fire, and they could immediately spread it to the other 29,000 people. This way, the power of the heaven fire could be spread to the other 29,000 people. This method was undoubtedly many times more powerful than the Netherworld King's method of sharing the heaven fire. Soon, the heaven fire in the 20,000 people's bodies was extinguished. Apart from some slight pain, they didn't suffer any injuries. However, what followed was the violent eruption of the Heavenly Law Master's fire. The 1,000 people were once again burned by the terrifying heavenly fire. Before it could harm them, the heavenly fire was swiftly distributed by the others, and it was clear that the pores of everyone else were leaking weak embers of fire. Their expressions were quite painful, but it wasn't to the point where they couldn't bear it. Finally, even though the heavenly flame erupted violently, it also left quickly. In the blink of an eye, all of the Heavenly Law Master's flames disappeared. None of the 30,000 people were injured. Greenwood excitedly clenched his fist. Success! He suppressed his excitement and looked at the golem. The golem announced expressionlessly, "Ling Yun passed the first test." Even though he could tell that Ling Yun had cheated, the test rules didn't prohibit such cheating method. Moreover, Greenwood was a descendant of a large saint clan, so he could only pretend that he didn't see anything. Great! Greenwood was incomparably excited, and he couldn't help but laugh. "This month's great family clan is mine, Ling Yun." As he spoke, he looked at the Nether King beside him. The latter's expression was gloomy. He was already in low spirit. Being stared at by Ling Yun, he felt even more ashamed and embarrassed. However, when he looked at Su Yu and the others beside him, he felt much better. After all, the Nether King wasn't at the bottom, so it wasn't that embarrassing. Later, it would be this motley crew that came out of nowhere who would be embarrassed. Judging from their composition, there weren't many strong Heavenly Law Masters among them. How could they have the courage to come and take the Great Family Clan test? Who gave them the courage to do so? Greenwood also looked confident. He now felt that it was a waste of time for Su Yu's people to take the test. There was no need at all. It was obvious that almost no one was qualified to be the Heavenly Law Master. However, in the Golem Palace, he didn't dare to say anything. He could only stand calmly under the arena, waiting for the second test to begin. "Are you ready?" The Golem looked at Su Yu and the others. He was also puzzled. In the past, there had been ungrateful people who had come to take the test in an attempt to bluff their way through. However, after witnessing the cruelty of the test, many wisely withdrew. On the other hand, Su Yu was still calm and insisted on taking the test. "Go up." Su Yu waved his hand and an invisible trail appeared, fusing into the bodies of the 30,000 Cauldron's members. They stepped forward anxiously. If it weren't for their absolute trust in Su Yu, they wouldn't have dared to come up. Previously, the 5,000 members of the Netherworld King had been killed in an instant, which was a heavy blow to their souls. The crowd lined up together, feeling anxious and fearful. "Begin," the Golem said quietly as he looked at them with a sigh. The Netherworld King had only been short of 5,000 people, yet he had still ended up in such a miserable state. How could this motley crew fare? In a moment, no one would be able to remain in the arena. All of them would be reduced to ashes. Greenwood and the Nether King looked on calmly, as if they could already see the miserable fate of the 30,000 people screaming in pain. Buzz, buzz. Intense heavenly law fire immediately appeared around the arena. Even though it was far away, the members of the Cauldrons on the arena felt an intense burning pain on their skin. As the heavenly fire approached, the burning pain became more and more intense. Finally, the heavenly fire engulfed everyone with a heaven-devouring momentum. However, the strange thing was that none of them felt any pain. The heavenly fire was burning on their bodies, but none of them felt any pain. Even the burning pain they had felt before was slowly disappearing, replaced by warmth. Greenwood and the Nether King were not the only ones who were shocked by this scene. Even the Golem was shocked. With his cultivation level, how could he not see that the Heavenly Law Master was not among them? However, how did they withstand the Heavenly Law Master's flames? It was unbelievable. Upon closer inspection, the Golem finally discovered that there was a faint flickering trace on their bodies. When the Heavenly Law Master's flames approached, they were bounced off by an invisible force, unable to cause any harm to them. "What is this?" The Golem was a little uncertain. Soon, the second wave of heavenly fire, which was even more violent, erupted. It was this heavenly fire that killed 5,000 members of the Netherworld King in an instant. The heavenly fire engulfed them all. However, to their great shock, they saw a clear remnant mark hovering above the heads of the 30,000 people, which absorbed all the heavenly fire that fell on them, leaving nothing behind. Chapter 29:52. If he was not mistaken, this was the ancestral technique of the Star Clan, which had been destroyed by the Son of the Holy Mountain because it had rebelled with the 8-star civilizations a century ago. The ancestral technique of the Star Clan had the ability to shift the position of the stars, which could shift the enemy's attack elsewhere. The more advanced the ancestral technique was, the more powerful the shift would be. Generally speaking, the Star Clan, who had trained to a high level, could shift the attack of a Peak Path Master. Only the Star Clan, who had trained to a high level, could shift the attack of a Heaven Law Master. However, Su Yu didn't teleport just one Heaven's Law Master's attack, but more than 30,000 of them. Just how profound must one's cultivation be to be able to achieve such a feat? He remembered that only a few elders of the Star Clan had been able to do that. "Are you a member of the Star Clan?" The stone man's eyes sharpened, but he did not question him. It had been an entire era. When the Star Clan was destroyed, the Xiaoyao Son of Heaven had said that the matter had come to an end. There was no need for him to blame his descendants for what had happened an era ago. Moreover, it was still unknown whether Su Yu was a descendant of the Star Clan or not. "No," Su Yu replied calmly. "Then," he asked, Did we pass the first test? The stone man looked at Su Yu and said, Passed. My lord. The Nether King stepped forward immediately and said angrily, My lord, this is ridiculous. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that there were not even a few Heaven Law Masters in Su Yu's faction. How could such a faction pass the first test? Was this a joke? I strongly suggest that we disqualify them from the test, the Nether King said through clenched teeth. Why? If the Cauldron could pass the test, then what about his dead brothers? The stone man was expressionless. He said coldly, Who gave you the courage to question my judgment? Upon hearing that, the Nether King shivered. He lowered his head and said weakly, But they cheated. The stone man snorted coldly. Didn't you cheat? Don't blame others for your inferiority. Get lost. We won't be tested by the Nether King within 100 years. The Nether King's heart trembled and his face turned pale. If they couldn't be tested within 100 years, wouldn't that mean that they had lost all hope? He had planned to rebuild his strength within 10 years and find enough masters of the heavenly law. Now everything was ruined. Human, just you wait. The Nether King stared at Su Yu fiercely, his eyes filled with hatred. Su Yu was baffled and asked, What does that have to do with me? She actually hated him for no reason at all. Su Yu did not provoke him at all. On the contrary, it was the other party who frequently provoked him, and Su Yu had always restrained himself. But, in the end, it was his own incompetence that caused great casualties and failure, and he blamed Su Yu for it. Humph! Continue to be stubborn. The Nether King vented his anger. Su Yu's eyes turned cold and he said, Then wait outside. This was really looking for the King of Hell in the middle of the night. Hey! The Nether King's eyes widened, and a murderous aura erupted from him. A motley crew dared to provoke him? It seemed like the first group test had failed. The Netherworld King was looked down upon. All right. Then you better pray that you didn't die in the Stoneman Palace. Otherwise, I will make you wish you were dead. The Nether King swung his sleeves and left. Su Yu retracted his gaze, and his eyes became cold. If the tripod really became a great family, it might not be a bad thing to destroy a force at the beginning of its establishment. When all of the Nether King's forces had left, the Stoneman Palace finally quieted down. The Stone Man looked at the remaining two parties and said, The second round of testing will test the strong men whose cultivation has reached the middle stage of the Heavenly Law Master. Make sure there are at least 3 of them. Qingmu's expression flickered slightly, and he looked a little guilty. The middle stage of the Heavenly Law Master was not so easy to achieve. Among the millions of strong men in the early stage of the Heavenly Law, there might not even be one middle stage existence. Ling Yun could barely gather 30,000 strong men in the early stage of the Heavenly Law, let alone 3 middle stage ones. Fortunately, he had relied on his family's connections to get 3 masters of the Heavenly Law from his family to keep up appearances, so it should work. The testing process will be more dangerous than the first round. You better think about it carefully, the Stone Man said expressionlessly. Qingmu was really hesitant. After the first round of testing, it was obvious that the testing process had been strengthened several times. If they were not careful, even the strong men in the middle stage of the Heavenly Law Master might die. However, considering that they were strong men from the family, it should not be a problem. Ling Yun will press forward. The Stone Man nodded and looked at Su Yu. Su Yu said quietly, We have no problem either. However, I have 2 companions who are still on their way. I need to go and greet them. The Stone Man frowned and said, After the testing, Ling Yun will wait for you for an hour at most. That's enough, Su Yu said. He waved his hand and asked the sinful girl to follow him out. When they were outside the Stoneman Palace, the sinful girl finally expressed her anxiety. Where are we going to turn into 3 middle-stage Heavenly Law Masters? She, who was the strongest among them, had only reached the threshold of the middle stage of the Heavenly Law Master. However, she could only be counted as one. As the leader of the Cauldron, Suyu had to participate in the last round of testing. He could not participate in the second round. Come here. Suyu brought her to a nearby alley. In the dark alley, one could not even see their own fingers. Protect me, Suyu said. The sinful girl nodded and immediately performed her divine technique. A dark and gloomy energy condensed in the entire alley, isolating it from the outside world. Then, Suyu weaved signs with his hands, and a powerful time realm was released with him as the center. 2 space-time gates appeared at the same time, and a Suyu walked out from each of them. Both Suyus were men. One of them was younger than Suyu, and the other was slightly more mature. I thought you had forgotten about us, the 2 Suyus said in unison. They were the incarnations of Suyu's future and past. Without saying a word, Suyu threw a black robe to each of them and said, "Don't show your true appearance." The 2 of them were telepathically connected with Suyu's real body, so they naturally understood what Suyu wanted to do. The future incarnation smiled. My real body, this kind of cheating is not a wise move. Suyu naturally understood what he was thinking. He said, "It's just a temporary measure. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." The future incarnation meant that it was not wise to cheat and give the Cauldron a position that did not match its status. In that case, the Cauldron would inevitably participate in the competition with the aristocratic families. Once Suyu was gone, the Cauldron would suffer a destructive blow and be easily destroyed. Chapter 2953. Blue veins popped out on Suyu's forehead. She had touched his sore spot. He rolled his eyes at the incarnation and finally looked at the sinful lady. After pondering for a while, he raised his hand and waved. Several remnant marks appeared and hovered above her head. "What is this?" the sinful lady asked in surprise. Suyu said, 3 remnant marks of the ancestor technique of the Saint clan. They are auxiliary, defensive, and offensive marks. The sinful lady said hesitantly, "Since my strength is at the middle stage of the great heavenly path master, I don't need them. Besides, 3 remnant marks can easily expose something and attract unnecessary trouble." Suyu had also thought of this. "If you get hurt, I will feel bad." Suyu sighed. After coming to the 9-star civilization, the sinful lady had followed Suyu without any ambition. How could Suyu let the sinful lady take risks for him? It's just a normal test. There should be no problem. The sinful lady was moved and had a strange feeling. It was as if there was a sweet taste in her heart. Suyu's expression became serious, and he shook his head slightly. "No. From the many changes in the first round of testing, I can infer that there will be changes in the second round as well. It may put your life in danger." Suyu was worried. It's better to be safe. He still didn't know what the second round of testing would be like. He had to be cautious. As for his 2 incarnations, he didn't have to worry at all. Suyu knew how strong he was. After getting ready, the 4 of them returned to the Stone Man Palace. Just then, the 3 examiners of Lingyun had entered the arena. The 3 of them stood there motionless like wooden stakes. Their eyes were closed and they were sweating profusely. What was more terrifying was that there were unknown wounds on their bodies. They didn't attack anyone, but their bodies began to be injured. Suyu's pupils shrank slightly. He knew the second round of testing wouldn't be easy. Suddenly, a scream was heard. One of them opened his eyes, which were full of fear and pain. His whole body was dripping with blood, especially his chest, where there was a huge bloody hole running through his body. Theoretically, he should have died. Strangely, when he woke up, the wound on his chest, which should have been fatal, healed a lot, leaving him half dead. As for the other 2, they persisted until a ding sound came from the arena. The 2 of them seemed to have woken up from a dream, but their expressions were especially tense, as if they had just been in a life-and-death battle. Greenwood was stunned. Unexpected, everything was unexpected. In the past, the second round of examination only determined the overall cultivation of the examinee by attacking some puppet. However, the improved second round was actually a dream test. Moreover, the damage suffered in the dream could be returned to the original body. The stone man put his hands in his sleeves and said expressionlessly, "One person has been eliminated. There are less than 3 middle-stage masters of the heavenly law. The test has failed." Greenwood's heart trembled, and he tried to explain, "Sir, my subordinate's cultivation has indeed reached the middle stage of the heavenly Tao Lord realm. This test is too unfair." The golem said indifferently, "Whether or not you reach it doesn't depend on your cultivation, but your overall strength." He seemed to have seen through Greenwood, and his gaze became much sharper. There are some special methods that can temporarily raise one's cultivation to the middle stage of the heavenly law lord, but their strength may not be able to keep up. As a mid-stage lord of the heaven Tao, not only did his cultivation have to keep up, but he also had to improve his various domains and divine technique. The master of the Tao of heaven, who relied on cheating and forcefully ascended to the middle stage, did not have such an ability. Hearing this, Greenwood guiltily averted his gaze. The person who had been eliminated had relied on a special method to barely reach the middle stage of the heavenly law lord. If it was in the past, it would have been easy, but now it was impossible. After examining them, the stone man looked at Suyu. "Are your people ready?" Suyu gave the sinful woman and the other two a look, then they quietly went up the stage. "Wait, why are there 2 of your people who can't show their faces?" Greenwood asked. Suyu asked, "Is there a rule that forbids them from concealing their true appearances?" What a joke. Among the 3 people who tested Ling Yun just now, weren't there 2 members from the Holy Clan who tried to hide him? Why did he feel that something was wrong when it came to others? No. However, since you've cheated in the past, I think it's better for you to show your true face, Greenwood said coldly. Suyu chuckled. "Why do you care? Just stand aside." "You." Greenwood's eyes flickered with hostility, but he didn't finish his sentence, because the stone man looked at him coldly. "Shut up." He looked at Suyu again, but didn't mention the 2 people in black robes. Instead, he announced the rules. "The second round of examination is life-threatening, so you must consider it carefully. If you suffer a simple fatal attack during the examination, the damage will be halved after you wake up. However, if your soul is destroyed in the dream, or your body is destroyed, and you can't wake up, then you can't be saved." The person who failed just now had his heart destroyed in the dream, but he woke up in time, so his life wasn't in danger. The sinful woman said calmly, "Let's begin." The 3 of them stood side by side on the stage and slowly closed their eyes. Her vision was plunged into darkness, but it suddenly brightened. However, the sinful woman knew that it wasn't because she had opened her eyes, but because she had quickly entered a dream. When she opened her eyes again, the sinful woman found a person who looked exactly like her standing in front of her. No, to be exact, even their souls were exactly the same. Only their temperaments were different. The other person's temperament was more graceful and elegant, but also more indifferent and ruthless. It was as if she was an existence that ruled over the 9 heavens. She stood there, looked at the sinful woman quietly, and said mercilessly, "How can a vessel appear in front of me?" Her identity was self-evident. She was Mirror Flower Heaven. However, this wasn't the real Mirror Flower Heaven, but an illusion created by the sinful woman's subconscious. Whatever a person was most afraid of would appear in the dream. Although she had never told anyone about it, the person she was most afraid of was undoubtedly Mirror Flower Heaven, who had used her as a vessel. The sinful woman's pupils shrank, and a rare look of fear appeared on her face. Her body couldn't help but shiver. In the past, she might have continued to be afraid. But now, as Suyu's figure appeared in her mind, she somehow calmed down and felt that it wouldn't matter even if she died now. If she died for Suyu, she wouldn't be afraid of dying. Her eyes suddenly became sharp, and she pulled out the sinful sword. She said, "It's just a product of a dream." With a sweep of the sinful sword, the strength of the middle stage of the Heaven Law Master erupted. Mirror Flower Heaven smiled faintly, then disappeared. Then, the sinful woman's vision went black, and her consciousness returned. She opened her eyes in confusion, and her face was full of surprise. Did she pass just like that? Only 1 or 2 breaths had passed, right? But when she opened her eyes, she found that her whole body was drenched in sweat, and at least a cup of tea's time had passed in the outside world. You can actually wake up from the dream on your own. Not bad, the stone man praised her, which was rare. The rest of the examinees waited for the test time to be up, and then they were forcibly brought out of the dream. Su-yu didn't expect that the first one to succeed would be the sinful woman, who was the weakest, and not his 2 clones. Chapter 2954. The expressions of the 2 clones were extremely strange. Their bodies were covered with hideous wounds, and blood was flowing freely. Obviously, they had suffered serious injuries in their dreams. However, there was not much fear on their faces. Instead, there was only a complex expression. It was 30% pain, 30% shame, and 30% grief. It was as if they were going through some kind of excruciating torture. Su-yu, what happened to them? After the sinful lady got off the stage, she was surprised to find that she had succeeded before Su-yu's 2 clones. No one knew better than her how powerful Su-yu's 2 clones were. Moreover, the expressions of the 2 clones were too strange. Hearing this, Su-yu closed his eyes slightly, and a bitter taste spread in his mouth. Wait patiently, I believe in myself. No one knew him better than he did. Su-yu could imagine what the 2 clones had encountered in their dreams. In his life, there was only one person who could make him feel pain, shame, and sorrow. It was Qin Xian'er, the woman he had let down the most and felt the deepest guilt. As expected, the 2 clones had the same scene in their dreams. In the dream, a woman was holding a long blade, tears streaming down her face. Why did you let me down? Why? Su-yu's clone stood motionless, allowing her to hurt him. His eyes were staring at Qin Xian'er with a complicated expression. Puff! A sword pierced through Su-yu's chest. Su-yu did not even frown, but the sorrow in his eyes deepened. Brother Yu, I have always treated you with sincerity. Why did you betray me? Qin Xian'er pulled out her sword, and blood splattered everywhere. Tears still stained her face, she said. You still love Xia Jingyu, don't you? After so many years, you still haven't forgotten her. But I'm your wife. Do you even put me in your eyes? Looking at her tearful accusation, Su-yu did not say a word. Moreover, why didn't you save me? Why did you let me die in the hands of the ancient god Jilong? Why? She clutched her heart and cried, My heart hurts, it really hurts. As she spoke, Qin Xian'er's face was filled with murderous intent. She stabbed her sword again, and this time, it was aimed at Xia Qingqian's heart. If you feel guilty, if you feel that you have wronged me, then you can atone for it with your life. The long sword was like a rainbow, and it immediately pointed at Su-yu's heart. If nothing unexpected happened, Su-yu would still not block it, just like the previous dozen sword strikes. However, this time, when the tip of the sword was about to reach Su-yu's chest, Su-yu finally moved. He raised his finger and gently blocked the sharp tip of the sword. Qin Xian'er suddenly raised her head and said, Why should I hide? What right do you have to hide? The complicated look on Su-yu's face gradually disappeared. There was no more pain, no more shame, only sorrow. The real Xian'er won't harm me, Su-yu said in a hoarse voice. He was the only one in Xian'er's life, and she placed him first. How could she hurt him? How could she kill him? When Su-yu first saw Xian'er in his dreams, he came back to his senses and knew who she was. She just wanted to see Qin Xian'er again and listen to her voice. That was all. How do you know? You've done so many wrong things to her. Don't you think you deserve to die? Qin Xian'er stepped back. Her eyes and voice became unfamiliar. Su-yu moved his body and said, So, this is why I didn't kill you. He knew that Qin Xian'er wouldn't hold a grudge against him because of Xia Jingyu. He also knew that Qin Xian'er wouldn't blame him for not saving her before she died. Even in the most painful years of her life, she still hoped for Su Yu's well-being instead of hatred. However, Su Yu blamed himself. The more Qin Xian'er acted this way, the more Su Yu felt guilty. So, he quietly listened to the fake Qin Xian'er vent her hatred. Now, she had finished listening. So what? Can you bear to kill me? Qin Xian'er seemed to have seen through Su Yu. She was not afraid. Instead, she raised her head and said, "Come on. Try to kill me. Anyway, you've wronged me all your life. You won't feel any guilt killing me." Su Yu stepped forward and said calmly, "I'm very grateful that you let me see Qin Xian'er again and hear her voice again. However, that doesn't mean you can humiliate Xian'er as you wish." A gust of wind blew from the tip of his foot, and a wisp of the powerful energy of a middle-stage master of the heavenly law charged forward. Qin Xian'er's face gradually became calm. She didn't resist but said calmly, "You passed." Then, she was destroyed by the strong wind and turned into dust. The two clones woke up almost at the same time, and their injuries healed. However, their eyes were still filled with sadness. The future clone walked down and said, "Main body, don't let Xian'er wait for too long. You owe her too much." Su Yu nodded silently. How could he not understand that he owed Xian? He raised his head and looked at the stone man. "How was it? Did we pass?" The stone man looked at the sinful lady and the two clones meaningfully. He knew very well how dangerous the second round of the test was. Compared to the first round, it didn't just test one's strength, but also one's temperament. If one's temperament wasn't up to par, it was highly likely that one would die in it. Since the beginning of the test, no force had ever successfully passed it. He didn't expect that the Cauldron, who looked mediocre, would actually pass the test. It was really unexpected. He nodded slightly and said, "The second round of the test is a success." Qing Mu, who was beside him, couldn't believe it. He asked, "How did you cheat?" He couldn't accept that a force that didn't even have a few masters of the heavenly law could pass the test. Su Yu calmly looked at him and said, "Next is the third round of the test. Those who are not involved should leave so that they don't affect my performance." Qing Mu clenched his teeth and was about to scold him when the stone man said, "You have already failed the second round of the test. If you don't leave now, do you want me to personally ask you to leave?" Since the stone man had spoken, Qing Mu could only bow and cup his fist. Yes, Ling Yun will leave now. If this stalemate continued, he would end up like the Netherworld King. He wouldn't be able to participate in the test for hundreds of years. However, before he left, he glared at Su Yu fiercely, like the Netherworld King. Although he didn't blame Su Yu for his failure, he didn't hold back either. In the end, only the Cauldron was left. The stone man stared at Su Yu. To be honest, he didn't expect the weakest force to successfully make it to the last round. Instead, Ling Yun, whom he had been most optimistic about, had been defeated in the second round of the test. Alright, the third round is to test the strength of the leader. You must be at the level of an ancient saint. Are you ready? The stone man's expression was solemn. Su Yu looked at the stone statue of Prince Xiaoyao on the arena. This stone statue hadn't been used at all. Chapter 29:55. As if noticing Su Yu's gaze, the stone man said, "As you can see, that is the stone statue of Prince Xiaoyao. Among the 10 emperors, he represents destruction. Indeed, among the 10 emperors of the Holy Mountain, only Prince Xiaoyao was active in the world, leading the destruction of various civilizations in the Great Beginning Realm. In contrast, the other 9 emperors had never set foot in the world. It was not an exaggeration to say that Prince Xiaoyao represented destruction. The third test is the stone statue of Prince Xiaoyao. You will fight with it. Imagine the danger," the stone man said. "It's not too late to back out now. When the test really starts, I won't be able to stop it." Hearing this, Su Yu's expression was indifferent. "No need, let's begin." He had fought with the clone of Prince Xiaoyao many times. How could he deal with a mere stone statue? The stone man was silent for a moment, then frowned slightly. Think carefully. Su Yu looked at him and said meaningfully, "You are very long-winded." Intuition told Su Yu that there was something wrong with this stone man. Was the previous test not dangerous? Did he remind him again and again? No. Judging from the cruelty of the test, the Stone Man Palace did not care about the life of the examinee at all. Now, he was curious and concerned about the examinee's safety, repeatedly reminding Su Yu to back out. Who would believe that there was no problem? You don't know what's good for you. The stone man snorted and waved his sleeves. Since you want to die, go ahead. The stone man pressed his palm on the arena, leaving a palm print on it. A strange scene appeared. Traces of blood seeped out from the print. The blood quickly spread throughout the entire arena, turning it into a sea of blood. The stone statue of Prince Xiaoyao, which had been motionless all this time, finally moved. It automatically absorbed the blood and gathered all the blood on its body, turning it into a layer of bloody clothes. The stone statue's face was already gloomy. After being covered with a layer of bloody clothes, it looked even more gloomy, like a man-eating demon. Crack! Suddenly, several cracks appeared on the face of the stone statue. The stone skin around the eyes suddenly peeled off, revealing two dark red eyes that were constantly moving. Then, the stone skin around the mouth, nose, and ears all broke off, revealing dark golden skin. Are you prepared to die for challenging me? The stone statue of Xiao Yao, son of heaven, asked indifferently. Su Yu slowly stepped onto the stage, calmly saying, "A stone statue does not deserve to be so insolent." The stone statue of Emperor Xiaoyao turned around and looked at Su Yu. His dark red eyes were filled with confusion. A feeling of déjà vu. "We have met before," the stone statue of Xiaoyao, son of heaven, said slowly. Even though Su Yu had a custom-made black robe to cover his figure, it still could not block the perception of the stone statue of Emperor Xiaoyao. Su Yu clenched his fist and pulled out an illusory sword formed by the absolute heaven sword. Its might was not even 1/10,000th of the real one. He said lightly, "It has indeed been a while." To be precise, he had seen the clone of Prince Xiaoyao in the famous Sword Saint tribe, but it did not notice Su Yu. Upon hearing this, the stone man could not help but be shocked, and he stared at Su Yu in surprise. This human actually met Xiaoyao, son of heaven, before? The stone statue of Emperor Xiaoyao had a weak connection with Emperor Xiaoyao himself, and they could sense each other. Since the stone statue said that it had seen him before, it must have been the feeling conveyed by the real body. However, the stone man could not figure out why the high and mighty Xiaoyao, son of heaven, would have any connection with this lowly dust that needed to establish a small family. There should not be any connection between the two. So, you have come to challenge me. Do you have the consciousness of returning to the void? The dark red eyes of the stone statue of Emperor Xiaoyao turned to look at Su Yu. Su Yu held the illusory Absolute Heaven Sword formed by the Absolute Heaven Sword, and without saying a word, he slashed at the stone statue. Although the power of this sword was not as good as the real Absolute Heaven Sword, it was not something that an ancient saint strong man could withstand. The sword energy, which was almost tangible, could completely destroy the stone statue of an ancient saint if there were no accidents. At the very least, it should be seriously injured. However, the stone statue of Emperor Xiaoyao showed a hint of mockery. It stood motionless on the spot, allowing the sword energy to attack its body. As a result, with a clang, the sword energy was completely blocked, as if it had attacked an extremely hard iron block. Even the stone clothes on the surface of the stone statue were not damaged. The people below the stage could see that something was wrong. The sinful lady squinted her eyes and said in a serious voice, "What's going on? Shouldn't the overall strength of the stone statue be similar to that of an ancient saint?" However, Su Yu's sword attack just now had almost reached the peak of the ancient saint level, yet it could not hurt him at all. Was this a joke? The stone man, who was the judge, showed an expression of, "I warned you," and said calmly, "Who said the strength of the stone statue of Emperor Xiaoyao must be at the ancient saint level? Its function is to test the strength of the examinee." The sinful lady asked, "This is too unfair. What if the stone statue of Emperor Xiaoyao used too much force?" It was obvious that the stone statue of Emperor Xiaoyao had its own wisdom. It completely decided how much force it used. If it used a little more force, even the strongest ancient saint would not be able to pass. If it used a little less force, even if its strength was not at the ancient saint level, it could still pass the test. This round of testing was too unfair. Moreover, it could be imagined that this was definitely a situation that had happened recently. Suyu really did not know what the Stone Man Palace was planning. Why did they have to make the test so difficult and unpredictable? It was as if they sincerely did not want people to pass the test. The Stone Man shrugged with a smile. If you think it is unfair, you can choose not to participate. You can choose to give up. The sinful lady clenched her fists, feeling extremely humiliated. On the arena, Suyu was expressionless. He did not have any emotional fluctuations. Even his doppelganger had been destroyed by him, let alone a mere stone statue. He looked at the stone statue with pity and said, "You really should not have met me." As he spoke, he waved his finger. A trace track appeared immediately and quickly bombarded the body of the stone statue. Crack! Under the effect of the ancestral technique, the stone clothes on the surface of the indestructible stone statue finally shattered with a loud bang. However, what was shattered was only the stone skin on its body. A golden stone statue appeared in front of Suyu. The skin on its body was neat and clean, without any injuries. There were only traces left behind, indicating that the attack just now had caused quite a bit of damage. As expected, the dark red eyes of the stone statue were no longer indifferent. There was only ferocity and murderous intent. "You can die now." The stone statue lifted its foot and stomped on the ground fiercely. As a result, the entire arena collapsed in an instant. The stone statue jumped into the air, then turned into a beam of red light and pressed down on Suyu from above. While it was still in midair, Suyu felt as if Mount Tai was pressing down on him. It was as if his whole body was about to be torn apart. The stone statue had used the power of a great saint to suppress Suyu with absolute strength. Chapter 2956. Since you don't follow the rules, don't blame me. Suyu's eyes were cold. The stoneman judge below the stage sneered. What else can you do in the Stone Man Palace? The stoneman didn't care. No matter how dissatisfied Suyu was, he had to admit defeat. Suyu didn't even look at him, let alone the stone statue of Prince Xiaoyao above him. He clenched his fist, and the real absolute heaven sword flew out of the storage device. At that moment, the stone statue of Prince Xiaoyao was already bearing down on him. Its eyes were fierce. "Human, go to hell." The pressure of a great saint was completely released. Suyu was expressionless. He just gently held the hilt and slowly pulled out the absolute heaven sword. The body of the absolute heaven sword trembled in resistance, more intensely than ever before, because the Prince Xiaoyao it was most willing to acknowledge was right in front of it. Fortunately, there were remnants of the resentment of the two great saints in the absolute heaven sword. With their help, Suyu could barely stabilize the sword. "It's you who should die." Clang! The absolute heaven sword was unsheathed. Suddenly, the world turned dark, and the sun and moon lost their light. The surrounding area felt the restlessness of the atmosphere, especially the path energy, which gathered at the place where the absolute heaven sword appeared at an amazing speed. Because the condensed path energy was so thick, the friction between the path energy created sparks. Countless sparks gathered together and formed a curtain of fire that blotted out the sky and covered the earth, illuminating the earth in a deep red. Many people raised their heads, only thinking that the heavens were being ignited, making them bow down in worship, feeling endless reverence. This was the case in the outside world, let alone the Stone Man Palace. As soon as the Absolute Heaven Sword appeared, the whole Stone Man Palace, with Su Yu at the center, was burning, forcing the stoneman and the sinful girl to retreat. The burning fire blocked their sight and their probing souls, making it impossible to see what was happening inside. They could only see the stone statue of Prince Xiaoyao smashing down with the power to destroy the sky. Then there was an earth-shattering sound. The arena, which had already been shattered, completely shattered. Even the Stone Man Hall trembled violently. The sinful girl had a bad feeling and said, "Everyone in the cauldron, withdraw from the Stone Man Palace." She could see that Su Yu was about to go all out, and once he did, the small Stone Man Palace would not be able to withstand it. The Stone Judge was able to keep his composure. He looked up at the faintly discernible patterns on the wall and calmly said, "Don't worry. If the Stone Golem Hall was so easily destroyed, then it wouldn't be called the Stone Golem Hall." The Stone Golem Hall had been carefully designed. Even the stronger great saints wouldn't be able to destroy it. Even the stone statue of Xiao Yao, Son of Heaven, did not have this ability, let alone a mere human. The sinful lady did not listen to him. She was the only one who understood Su Yu's true combat power. She immediately led all the members of the cauldron away from the Stone Man Palace. The Golem Judge scoffed at this. Bang! Suddenly, a muffled sound and a miserable groan came from the flames that filled the sky. Immediately after, a tangible palm flew out from the flames, almost brushing past the Stone Judge's body as it flew out. His palm hit the wall and immediately created a hole in it. The so-called protective pattern was directly destroyed, and it did not produce any protective effect. The Stoneman Judge's face stiffened. His back was drenched in cold sweat. When he looked at the center of the flames, there was a hint of fear in his eyes. If he was not mistaken, the palm that flew out was not the human, but the stone statue of Xiao Yao, Son of Heaven. But how was that possible? The cultivation of the stone statue of Xiao Yao, Son of Heaven, had reached the level of a great saint. Even the strongest ancient saint would not be able to harm it. Dong! Suddenly, a series of afterimages flew out from the flames and scattered in all directions. Some of them went in the direction of the Stone Judge. This time, he was not so lucky. He was hit by one of the fragments of the stone statue. Bang! In an instant, the fragments of the stone statue were like the sharpest blades, piercing through his body and leaving a bloody hole. He was also pushed by a powerful force and slammed into the wall. Crack! A large area of cracks appeared on the body of the Stone Judge. Traces of black liquid flowed out from the crack. It was the blood of the stone statue's heart. It would only flow out when the Stone Judge was seriously injured. After the Stone Judge luckily escaped, he looked at the sea of flames in fear and immediately ran out of the stone statue palace, not daring to stay any longer. As soon as he left the stone statue palace, he heard a loud rumbling sound behind him. He turned his head and saw that the stone statue palace had collapsed. Apart from the center of the arena, everything else was buried. The flames in the center of the arena gradually weakened. The Stoneman Judge's heart skipped a beat. He stared at the fire without blinking. A blurry silhouette appeared in front of him. That figure was not the stone statue of Xiao Yao, Son of Heaven, but Su Yu. As for the stone statue of Xiao Yao, Son of Heaven, all that was left was its chest, which Su Yu had stepped on. The rest of its body had been destroyed. At this point, the battle was over. Su Yu slowly sheathed his sword and looked at the Stone Judge. He said lightly, "What are you waiting for? Come and judge the winner." The Stone Judge finally came back to his senses. He swallowed hard and looked at Su Yu with fear in his eyes. What kind of terrifying strength did this young human have? Good, good. The Stone Judge walked over and looked at the stone statue of Xiao Yao, Son of Heaven. His scalp went numb, and he did not dare show any disrespect in his eyes. "It is your victory," the Stone Judge said immediately. In fact, was there even a need to judge? Su Yu was unharmed, but the stone statue of Xiao Yao son of heaven was destroyed. Su Yu nodded slightly. Then, give it to me. All 3 rounds of tests had been successful. The tripod had successfully been promoted to a great family and should have received a seal. However, the stone judge hesitated and said awkwardly, I don't have a seal anymore. Su Yu narrowed his eyes and walked slowly toward him. Are you trying to tell me that we risked our lives to pass the 3 rounds of tests, but in the end, you don't have the seal of a great family? The stone judge's forehead was covered in cold sweat. He hurriedly said, The seal has been given to someone else in advance. This was why the test of the stone statue palace was so difficult, and why it was so malicious that it did not allow people to pass. Because the seal had been sold to other forces, there were no extra seals to give to those who passed. Everything had been going smoothly. With the current level of difficulty, no one was qualified to pass the test. However, who knew that a ferocious Su Yu would appear out of nowhere and even crush the stone statue of Xiao Yao son of heaven? Given it to someone else in advance? Fine, I will report this matter to the Hall of Heaven, Su Yu said coldly. The Hall of Heaven was also an organization for the descendants of the Holy Mountain Heaven. The difference was that the Hall of Heaven was directly connected to the Holy Mountain Heaven. Anything that happened in the 9-star civilization would be reported to the Heaven by the Hall of Heaven. Moreover, there were countless powerful people in the Hall of Heaven who were in charge of the various stone statue palaces. As a stone judge, he dared to sell the seal to someone else for personal gain. Chapter 29:57. Wait, the stoneman quickly said. Give me a little more time, I'll think of another way. Su Yu shook his head. Why should I believe you? He could not trust any of the descendants of the emperor, let alone this stoneman with ulterior motives. Then what will make you believe me? The stoneman anxiously asked, stomping his feet. Once he reported this to the emperor's palace, he would not be punished with death, because the punishment would be a living hell. Perhaps it would be banished to the most terrifying place in the sacred mountain, the Yellow Springs. There was no time there. Once he entered, he would become a grain of sand in the Yellow Springs, lying there forever. He could not speak, move, or train. He could only lie there for eternity, experiencing the most ruthless torture of time. He could not die even if he wanted to. Countless descendants of the emperor would rather die than enter the Yellow Springs if they knew they were going to be punished like this. Su Yu was slightly surprised. He was just threatening, but the stoneman's degree of fear was beyond his expectations. Even if he were to kill him, he might not be this afraid. He rolled his eyes and said, Then tell me, how do you think of a way? The stoneman was quick-witted and said, I only gave you this month's seal. The next month's seal has yet to be delivered. As soon as the emperor's palace delivers it, I will give it to you immediately. I swear on the bloodline of the descendants of the emperor that I am not lying. Su Yu's eyes flickered. Every stoneman palace only had one quota every month, so what the stoneman said was not entirely a lie. However, it was the stoneman's own fault. Why should Su Yu bear the responsibility? My time is precious, and I have no time to delay, Su Yu said coldly. The stoneman quickly said, How about this as compensation? While you wait, I will give you a piece of land. How about that? Su Yu's eyes lit up. His favorite territory was, of course, the famed Sword Saint clan. However, it was being eyed by many and was not easily occupied. The Cauldron was indeed lacking a temporary territory. Do you have the ability to divide the territory? Su Yu questioned. The stoneman said proudly, Of course. Within this realm, who would dare to disrespect me? The so-called realm was the concept of territorial division in the 9-star civilization. The 9-star civilization was divided into 10 days, and each day was governed by an emperor. Every day there were 24 caves, and each cave contained 100 realms. At the moment, Su Yu was in an inconspicuous small realm in the heaven under the direct jurisdiction of Heavenly Prince Mirrorflower. As the only golem palace in this realm, the golem judge's status was quite high. Even if they forcibly divided a part of the territories of other forces, those forces could only be angry and not dare to say anything. "Where do you plan to settle us?" Su Yu asked. Golem Palace took out the map of the realm and pointed to the most central position. "This is the place with the most Dao Qi in the Cloud Wilderness. There is a force that has just been exterminated and its territory is empty. Why don't you go and take it over?" Su Yu fixed his gaze on it. The place was called Songtian Mountain. The map showed that there were 78 aristocratic families and 3 sacred clans near Songtian Mountain. One of them was the sacred clan that Qing Mu belonged to, and it was quite powerful. As for the other 2 sacred clans, they were even stronger. These forces occupied the best area of the Songtian Mountain, and the exterminated aristocratic family was located at the mountainside. The Dao Qi was quite abundant, and it could be considered a rather good place. "Why is it empty?" Su Yu's eyes lit up. In the 9-star civilization, every inch of land was worth its weight in gold. Any place with spiritual energy had been occupied. Why was this empty place not occupied by other forces? The golem judge shook his head. "I'm not sure, but this is the best place I can find for you. If you want a better place, you will have to wait for a long time, and you may not get it." After thinking for a while, Su Yu nodded slowly. "Well, I'll believe you this time, but you have to hand over the seal to me in a month at most. Otherwise, you know the consequences better than I do." Of course. Seeing that Su Yu had finally relented, the golem judge felt as if he had just passed by the gates of hell. Fortunately, he had encountered a new force with no background, and he could use a good place to deal with it. Otherwise, it would have been difficult to explain. Having survived the disaster, he immediately rebuilt the Golem Palace. Su Yu led the members of the Cauldron to Songtian Mountain. As soon as he left the city, Su Yu stopped and said lightly, "You have been following me for a while. How long do you plan to follow me?" In the city, a young man with wood patterns all over his body walked out sneakily. It was Qing Mu from the Saint clan. With a hint of fear on his face, he carefully approached Su Yu and bowed. "Greetings, Senior Su." Su Yu stared at him calmly. "Didn't you want to take revenge on me just now? I don't deserve to be called a senior." Hearing this, Qing Mu's face trembled. He hurriedly said, "I have eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai. Please forgive me if I have offended you." As he spoke, he ruthlessly slapped himself twice. Su Yu was not in the mood to argue with Qing Mu, so he said, "Speak quickly." Qing Mu hurriedly said, "Senior, I am willing to lead the way to the Hidden Sky Mountain. I am not blind. I can walk on my own," Su Yu said with a frown. Qing Mu said, "Senior, you must not know that the Hidden Sky Mountain is dangerous. Not long ago, a great family was destroyed." Su Yu's frown eased. Was the great family that he mentioned the one that had been destroyed? Why was it destroyed? Su Yu asked thoughtfully. Qing Mu hurriedly said, "It is said that 9 ancient ferocious beasts massacred the great family in one night." 9 ancient ferocious beasts? Su Yu's eyes narrowed. Why did it sound so familiar? As far as he knew, there was only one person who owned 9 ancient ferocious beasts. Gu Taishu. This guy is really famous. Su Yu could not help but be surprised. If he had any enemies from Jiuzhou until now, Gu Taishu should be the only one. His luck was not particularly strong, but his life was really tough. The collapse of an 8-star civilization, such a mighty catastrophe, and he did not die in it? It seems that the 9-star civilization is not that big. It is so easy to meet an old friend, Su Yu murmured thoughtfully. Life in the cloud desolate territory will not be too boring. Qing Mu's face was full of joy. He said, "I am willing to lead the way for you." The reason for the 180-degree change in his attitude was simple. Su Yu was strong enough to threaten the Holy Clan. How could Qing Mu dare to be his enemy? Su Yu stood still, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. He said, "It is too late. Let's get rid of the Netherworld King first." Its leader had provoked him again, and even threatened to take revenge on Su Yu. Such a disaster should be eliminated as soon as possible. Qing Mu's face froze. He said, "Senior, I am afraid you will not meet them." Chapter 2958. What's the reason? Su Yu did not want to be surrounded by the Underworld King's force. That force was not very strong, but most of its members were strong heavenly law masters. If they attacked the Cauldron when Su Yu was not there, it would undoubtedly pose a great threat to the members of the Cauldron. Therefore, it was better to nip this threat in the bud as soon as possible. Qing Mu said hurriedly, "The Underworld King is lucky." As soon as they left the Stone Man Palace, they received an order from the vassal Saint clan to go to a place called the Jingxin Ancient Forest as soon as possible. "I heard that a fossil was dug out there." He secretly clicked his tongue. The Underworld King was indeed lucky. Originally, the Underworld King had reported to the Saint clan that he had failed the test, but the Saint clan did not blame him. Instead, they ordered them to go to a nearby place to investigate the situation. It turned out that at the border of the Cloud Desolate territory and the nearby White Bone territory, someone had dug out a prehistoric fossil. Therefore, the Saint clan that the Underworld King was affiliated with had ordered the Underworld King to go and investigate the situation. Without this order, the Underworld King would probably have been destroyed. Just the thought of Su Yu destroying the stone statue of the great Saint Emperor Xiaoyao made Qing Mu shudder. "Fossil?" Su Yu asked thoughtfully. Qing Mu blinked. "Senior, don't you know about fossils?" Su Yu was in a 9-star civilization, but he did not know what a fossil was? Wasn't this too far-fetched? "Speak clearly," Su Yu said. Qing Mu did not dare to hesitate. The so-called fossil is a kind of energy crystal deposited in the depths of the 9-star civilization. The energy inside is enormous. Su Yu knew nothing about it, and he did not know how enormous it was. For example, to what extent is the energy? Su Yu asked casually. He was not interested. Energy crystals were not unfamiliar. Some civilizations even used crystals that contained special energy as currency. There was nothing strange about it. The fossils that the Saint clan valued were probably similar, except that the energy was slightly higher. "Sir, there is something you do not know," Qing Mu said. "It is said that the energy is the core of the 9-star civilization. Once it is emptied, the 9-star civilization will fall into a dead state. First, the spirit energy will dry up and the mountains will die. Then, all kinds of spiritual creatures will be on the verge of extinction. Finally, the civilization will not survive and become a dead place." Su Yu's heart skipped a beat. Weren't that the countless abandoned civilizations in the starry sky? Those civilizations were once 9-star civilizations, but every time they reached a certain stage, they would become a land of death. Su Yu had always thought it was similar to the destruction of an 8-star civilization. Only now did he understand that it was the 9-star civilization that had overexploited, causing the civilization to be on the verge of extinction. For countless eras, the nightmare-crossing beings were like blood-sucking bugs, sucking up the resources of one civilization after another. Then, they would constantly change to a new civilization, which was why there were so many decadent worlds in the outside world. Su Yu was a little confused, and said, "If we excavate the ores like this, what should we do after the 9-star civilization is squeezed dry?" Greenwood laughed. "Senior, you're worrying too much. Whenever a civilization is on the verge of collapse, a new civilization will be born to provide for our esteemed 9-star civilizations to migrate and continue to thrive." Upon hearing this, Su Yu shook his head slightly. This idea was not advisable. This was similar to the idea that if the sky collapsed, there would be a tall person to hold it up. They both pushed the responsibility to the capable person and enjoyed the moment with peace of mind. How are you so sure that a new civilization will be born? Suyu asked meaningfully. It was unknown where those civilizations came from. It was unimaginable how much energy was needed to create such a huge 9-star civilization. Who would provide such energy? How could one hand one's fate to an unknown existence? Greenwood scratched his head. How would we know? Anyway, it has always been like this, and there has never been an accident. Suyu shook his head and said, "Do you know where the fossil is?" He was a little interested in the fossil. Greenwood said cheerfully, "I have also received instructions from my family." He took out a round plate, on which was a moving map of the cloud wilderness. An orange light spot was shining on it. "This is the place." Suyu looked over and could not help but be surprised. What a coincidence! This location was exactly where the great sickle of 10,000 tribulations was. Could Emoheng have brought the great sickle of 10,000 tribulations here? Suyu thought for a moment and said, "Sinful girl, take the cauldron to the Tsangtian mountain first, but don't go to that territory. Find a nearby place to hide temporarily and wait for my return." "All right." The sinful girl nodded. Gu Taishu was likely to appear in that territory, and there was no one in the cauldron who could compete with Gu Taishu. "Lead the way," he said to Greenwood. Greenwood was happy to do so, and immediately led the way. As he walked, he took out a flying doctrine artifact and said, "Senior, please board." Suyu took a look and found that it was a mountain-shaped doctrine artifact. "What is it?" Suyu asked. Greenwood said, "A flying doctrine artifact unique to the cloud wilderness. It is extremely fast, comparable to space teleportation. It will take at most 2 days to reach the destination." 2 days? Suyu said, stroking his chin. "Both of your saint clans know about this, so there is no reason for the other forces not to know. In 2 days, someone will have already gotten to it." Greenwood said helplessly, "That can't be helped. We are far away, and it is likely that those who received the news first, or those who are near the fossil, will benefit from it." Suyu said, "What I mean is, we can also shorten the time." Greenwood was startled, and his face was bitter. "Senior, please don't make things difficult for me. This flying doctrine artifact is already the best in the cloud wilderness. I can't do anything about it, no matter how good it is." He was a little depressed. This senior probably didn't know how far the destination was from here. Even a great saint would need at least 3 days to reach it. Even if Suyu had the strength of a great saint, 3 days was inevitable. 2 days was already the limit, and Suyu was still not satisfied. I know the space domain. Why bother with a doctrine artifact?" Suyu said expressionlessly as he formed the space domain around him. Perhaps in the 8-star civilizations the space domain was rare, but in the 9-star civilizations there should be some. Otherwise, the flying treasure that Greenwood had just taken out had a space domain level that was very close to the origin level. It must have been made by someone who had mastered the origin level space domain. "Ah, Senior, you are an origin level space domain master?" Greenwood was dumbfounded. "Senior, are you from the Space Saint clan?" Indeed. The 9-star civilizations had a race that specialized in the space domain. Chapter 2959. The Space Master was a creature sent by Emperor Xiaoyao to the 8-star civilization to guard the place. His origin was still a secret. Most likely, he had something to do with the so-called Space Saint clan. "Sort of," Suyu said calmly. Part of his primordial space realm was successfully cultivated by the bloodline power of the Space Dominator. It would not be wrong to say that he had something to do with the Space Saint clan. Gulp! Qingmu swallowed hard, his eyes filled with fear. The Space Saint clan was the strongest clan in the cave, ruling over 100 territories, including the Cloud Desolate territory. He did not expect Suyu to come from such a clan. No wonder he had the guts to lead a group of disorderly people to establish a great clan. Perhaps he was a member of the Saint clan, just like himself, and wanted to establish his own clan. But the other party's background was more than 100 times greater than his. Elder, your cultivation and identity are things that I can only hope to achieve in this lifetime. Qingmu's respect grew. Su Yu did not bother to explain. Cut the crap, lead the way. Qingmu immediately pointed in a certain direction and said, It's trillions of miles away from here. The Yuan realm space around Su Yu flickered, and he disappeared with Qingmu. As for the sinful lady, she led the tripod's forces to the Tsangtian mountain. Somewhere in the cave, a group of white-robed masters of the Tao of the Heavens stood respectfully in a magnificent palace that stood atop a mountain. There were many of them, and they filled the sky above the hall. There were at least 100,000 of them. They all stood solemnly with their hands clasped behind their backs, looking up at the sky as if they were waiting for something. After a moment of silence, a silvery bell-like sound came from the sky. A beast carriage pulled by a snow-white demonic beast sped over. The crowd was excited. They knelt down on one knee and shouted loudly, The branch of the Myriad Cave Heavenly Law Palace pays its respects to the Grand Master. It turned out that this place was just a branch of the Myriad Cave Heavenly Law Palace. The carriage stopped, and a lovely 14-year-old girl dressed in a snow-white coat walked out leisurely from inside. She was the Grand Master of the Heavenly Law Palace, Bai Shui. The sun, moon, and stars faintly surrounded her. It was not an illusion, but a natural manifestation of her domain. To achieve such a level, one's cultivation had to be at least a great saint. Not bad. Ever since the Sword Sacred clan had seized 10% of the primordial energy, Bai Shui had finally broken through to the Great Sage level after years of accumulation, becoming the only Great Sage in the history of the Temple of Heaven. As long as she was willing, she could lead the Temple of Heaven to conduct a higher-level appraisal and promote the Temple of Heaven to a sacred clan. However, she had other more important things to do, so she didn't have time to advance. Please rise, Bai Shui said. The law masters of the branch palaces rose to their feet and looked at the shopkeeper, who looked like a young girl, with awe. Today, I have come to the branch palace for no other reason. Bai Shui said slowly, A few days ago, the Son of Heaven Palace sent a message to the Temple of Heaven, asking us to investigate the large number of creatures that have suddenly entered the Temple of Heaven. This made Bai Shui frown. Actually, she didn't need to ask to know who did it. Who else could it be other than Su Yu, who had taken advantage of her and stolen the Great Seal of the Heavenly Law Palace, as well as the stone statue seal? This guy deserves to be cut into pieces, but he's so tough. Bai Shui muttered. She had once thought that Su Yu had died in the Black Abyss near the Sacred Sword clan. Unexpectedly, a year later, she received news that a large number of unknown people had successfully entered the 9-star civilization using the official documents approved by the Temple of Heaven. She was happy and annoyed at the same time. You actually made 1 trillion official documents, you are really impolite. Bai Shui's heart ached. The stone statue seal had most likely been destroyed, right? What was more distressing was that the old guys in the Temple of Heaven seemed to have realized that she had lost the Great Seal. They had even interrogated her before, but she had cleverly changed the subject. Now she was trying to find a way to recover the Great Seal and the seal. The most effective way to find them was, of course, to find that B** starred. We will obey the orders of the Temple Master, the 100,000 Heavenly Law Masters shouted in unison. The scene was spectacular. They quietly waited for Bai Shui's further instructions. Since they were looking for someone, they should at least provide the person's appearance and characteristic. Bai Shui was also in a difficult position. She had spent a lot of time with Su Yu, but Su Yu had always been wearing a mask, so she couldn't see his face at all. Even now, she couldn't tell whether it was a man or a woman. She could only tell from the voice that it seemed to be a man. This person's identity is unknown, so it won't be easy to find him. But since he has led a large number of living creatures to the cave of 10,000 heavenly law, he must have established some forces. Spread out and search the 100 territories. Pay attention to the new forces that have appeared. The Heaven Law Masters nodded. Under Bai Shui's command, they were divided into 100 teams, each responsible for searching one territory. When everything was done, the Temple Master said meaningfully, "Grand Temple Master, to tell you the truth, our Temple Master has recently received reliable news that a fossil was found at the border of the Cloud Desolate Territory and the White Bone Territory." Hearing that, Bai Shui raised her eyebrows and gritted her teeth. A bunch of greedy things. Even now, they still don't repent. Have they forgotten where those abandoned 9-star civilizations came from? Any ambitious person knew that fossils were the foundation of a civilization and should never be destroyed. Otherwise, civilizations would wither away sooner or later. But they couldn't stop those who were blinded by greed. They kept searching for fossils and used the power within to improve themselves. Humans die in pursuit of wealth, and birds die in pursuit of food. For many years, the forces searching for fossils have never stopped. The Temple Master was worried. If the top few sacred clans don't take the lead, how will the forces below them know their place? Bai Shui was even angrier at the mention of this. Excavating fossils was a good start for the top forces. To ensure that their forces remained at the top, those forces spared no effort in excavating fossils. If they were still digging, how would the forces below them know their place? Grand Temple Master, it's best that we don't interfere. The sacred clans in the cave of 10,000 heavenly law are all ready to interfere. We can't stop them. The Temple Master suggested. Bai Shui snorted. Since I'm here, I won't let them do as they please. Grand Temple Master, you've just entered the Great Saint level. I'm afraid you shouldn't make them your enemy, the Temple Master said worriedly. There were many of them, and they were all veteran Great Saints. How could Bai Shui fight them? Bai Shui smiled slyly. I don't have to fight them head-on. All right, let me know if there's any news. I'll make a move first. Bai Shui immediately flew to the spot where the fossil had appeared. A day later, at the border of the Cloud Desolate Territory, Su Yu and Qing Mu tore through the space in front of a blazing mountain. Qing Mu was shocked. Senior's Yuan realm has already been cultivated to the late stage, right? They had arrived here in just one day? Chapter 2960. Su Yu replied calmly, more or less. His Yuan realm had been trained to its peak and could not go any further. If he went any further, he would have the legendary power that could rival that of the Holy Mountain's emperor. Is that the mountain where the fossils appeared? Su Yu looked at the mountains in front of him. One of the mountains was particularly eye-catching. It was blood-red all over, as if it had been splashed with a layer of divine blood. It gave off an eerie feeling. Qing Mu followed Su Yu's gaze and nodded slightly. Yes, when the fossils appear, there will be a blood disaster. He paused for a moment, then said, but with your strength, you will definitely be able to survive. Blood disaster? What do you mean? Su Yu also felt that the mountain was ominous. Qing Mu thought for a moment, his eyes filled with confusion. I don't know if you believe in the so-called unseen. In fact, at Qing Mu's level and status, he should have long understood that the so-called unseen was, in fact, some more powerful living beings. Su Yu had felt this even more clearly after he had walked step by step from the dust-like Shenyue Island to where he was today. Every time he thought he had encountered the will of the heavens, the ruler of the unseen world. But in the end, those were just powerful living beings beyond his understanding. Go on, Su Yu said calmly. Qing Mu said, every time a fossil appears, it is accompanied by a certain amount of death. It is really as if it has long been predestined. There has never been an exception. Even the smallest fossils can cause a certain amount of death, and there are all kinds of ways of death and injury. Either they fight each other and cause rivers of blood, or they attract natural disasters, or some dangerous things appear, and so on and so forth. There are many possibilities. Su Yu's eyes flickered slightly. A natural disaster? He wondered if the natural disaster that Qing Mu mentioned was the one that he had thought of. However, although it is full of danger, many forces still come to fight for it, because the benefits are too great. Qing Mu's eyes were filled with desire. The power contained in those fossils is so terrifying that it's said that even an early Heavendao Lord can become a great sage. In fact, there are even peak great sages who rely on those fossils to break through the final barrier and become beings comparable to the Sky Clan. Although Su Yu was tempted, he restrained himself. Fossils were obviously the essence of the 9-star civilization. Digging one piece was equivalent to digging one's own grave. Anyone with a bit of rationality would understand that they should resist. "Senior, do you want to go closer and dig?" Greenwood asked. Su Yu pondered it for a moment, then shook his head. "Forget it, I just want to take a look." Su Yu was not willing to dig his own grave. Moreover, he could sense the aura of several great saint-level experts even though he didn't have a clear perception. Some of them were quite terrifying. If a great sage expert had deliberately concealed himself, he wouldn't have been able to detect it. One could imagine the danger of fighting over fossils. Although he has the absolute heaven sword in hand, using it once consumes almost all of his strength. In a situation where there were so many great sage experts, it was better not to rashly participate in the fight. When he thought of this, he once again added some heavenly book characters to his body, making his black robe even more secretive, making it difficult for others to detect his identity. As for Greenwood, if he was by her side, it would be too conspicuous. "Wait here, I will go over and investigate," Su Yu said. Greenwood nodded and watched Su Yu go to the foot of the Blood Mountain, soon disappearing from his sight. With a thoughtful look in his eyes, he said, "If we can further befriend you, it will definitely be beneficial to our Saint Clan." Su Yu arrived at the foot of the Blood Mountain. There were already several territories nearby, all of which had been occupied in advance. There were groups of at least 3 to 5 people, and at most hundreds of people. Su Yu had no intention of fighting with them, so he chose a relatively quiet place to sit cross-legged and wait for the fossils to be completely born. Now, he just wanted to see what a fossil was, and why it could become the core of a 9-star civilization. "There is someone here, can't you see?" Suddenly, Su Yu had just sat down cross-legged when a cold, unfriendly voice came. Su Yu looked sideways and found that not far from him, under the shade of a tree, a woman in a yellow robe was sitting. She was extremely short, and her face was covered in a yellow robe that covered her whole body, leaving only her sparkling eyes visible. "Is this owned by your family?" Su Yu responded indifferently. He wasn't too close to the woman, so he didn't affect her at all. "Humph. Suit yourself. Don't regret it." The woman snorted and closed her mouth, silently cultivating. Su Yu also closed his eyes and carefully sensed, only to find that the energy here was extremely rich, probably hundreds of times more than in the outside world. A day's training here was equivalent to about 100 days in the outside world. As expected of the place where the fossils are about to be born, the abundance of the energy is beyond imagination. Su Yu was amazed. There were other places in the 9-star civilization where the energy was 100 times richer, but each of them had been occupied by the powerful families. Moreover, even if they occupied it, it was the core of the family, and only the enemy's clansmen were qualified to enjoy it. Now that there was a natural land here, one could imagine how precious it was. Su Yu immediately sat cross-legged and opened the time realm. A day's training time was equivalent to 1,000 days' worth of training. Coupled with the hundreds of times more effective training here than in the outside world, the results of a day's training would be beyond imagination. Su Yu did not hesitate to do it, and he immediately started to cultivate. Throughout the day, more and more forces arrived one after another. Among them was the Nether King. After the Nether King appeared, he looked at the strong men on the ground and couldn't help but click his tongue. He said, "I don't know when the family will arrive. We are not qualified to compete at all. There were several Saint clan members present, so how could the Nether King compete? My lord, look over there. Suddenly, a confidant pointed to a corner. The Nether King followed his gaze, and his pupils shrank. Am I seeing things? Although Suyu was masked, he didn't deliberately hide his aura. He could still recognize that this person was the leader of the Cauldron. But how was that possible? After receiving the order from his clansmen, he immediately rushed over. Suyu couldn't be one step ahead of him, could he? My lord, he is training, should we? The confidant made a gesture of cutting his throat. The Nether King's eyes flashed with a hint of ruthlessness. He said, Do you still need to ask? He gave a look, and his confidant led the two of them over. However, before they were ready to move, a small tree suddenly grew on the ground in front of them, causing them to stop in their tracks. Chapter 2961. Why are you here? The Nether King asked in disbelief. Even if Qing Mu had received the news later, he shouldn't have arrived earlier than him. Qing Mu walked out of the tree and said, The Saint clan has our own special methods. Hearing this, the Nether King was confused, but he didn't think too much about it. Qing Mu was different from him. He was just a subordinate of the Saint clan, but the Nether King was a direct descendant of the Saint clan, so it wasn't strange for him to have some special methods. Fine, you've come at the right time. The Nether King pointed at Suyu, who was meditating in Luoyang, and said in a low voice, Look at this person. Do you recognize him? Greenwood turned his head to look, his eyeballs rolling as he said, Why is it him? Why is he here? The Nether King's eyes turned cold. It seems like you have recognized him. We were both harmed by him. Since we've met, let's... He looked at Suyu fiercely, indicating that he wanted to kill Suyu. Qing Mu hesitated. It's just a small verbal conflict. Is there a need to kill him? The Nether King snorted coldly. How can it be a verbal conflict? This person's life must be taken. After hesitating for a while, Qing Mu said, Fine, I'll help you. His hands, which were hidden in his sleeves, were secretly activating the Nirvana artifact. When the Nether King attacked, he would also attack. Of course, his target wasn't Suyu, but the Nether King. As the saying went, it was easy to add flowers to a brocade, but difficult to provide help in a time of need. If he could help his senior in a time of need, it would be a great favor. However, I've suddenly changed my mind. The Nether King's eyes shone with cruelty. Isn't he cultivating? Then I'll make him go berserk. That will be the best punishment. Qing Mu's eyes flickered dangerously as he asked calmly, What do you plan to do? The Nether King laughed coldly. Unfortunately, I have a portion of the crazy heart powder that was bestowed upon me by the Saint clan. Once I inhale it during my cultivation, I'll definitely encounter all kinds of obstacles during my cultivation. In the end, I'll go berserk and become a cripple. Qing Mu's face was calm, and he didn't find it strange at all. This was because he and the Netherworld King were the same kind of people. In other words, there were no good people in the 9-star civilizations. The kind ones had long been devoured by the sinister 9-star civilization, and not even their bones were left. Sure, let me have a look, Greenwood said calmly. The Nether King chuckled. I've let you see a joke. He lifted his finger and opened his spatial storage device, taking out a white jade box. Who would have thought that his palm would be empty? What happened? The Nether King was stunned. He had clearly used his will to take out the insane heart powder. Why did he fail? He once again searched his space storage device with his consciousness, but what made him cry out in surprise was, Where's my heart madness powder? The insane heart powder in the spatial storage device had actually disappeared. He searched again in disbelief, but the result was that he couldn't find it. The heart madness powder was not a particularly precious item, but its disappearance was too bizarre. Could it be that if the transfer failed, the item would disappear from the storage device? Brother Nether King, what's wrong? Qing Mu asked in surprise. The Nether King looked at his palm and said, "Did you notice anything strange just now?" Ching Mu blinked his eyes and said, "No." Oh, it seemed like a gust of wind. He had indeed felt a strange gust of dark wind just now, but it had disappeared in a flash. Wind. The Nether King looked around but did not find anything strange. "That's strange," the Nether King said in surprise. "But don't worry about it." His gaze fell on Suyu again, and his eyes became cold. "Then let's just kill him." "Alright." Ching Mu's eyes turned cold. Just as the Nether King was about to attack Suyu, he suddenly took out a wooden dagger from his sleeve and thrust it at the Nether King's abdomen. The Nether King was caught off guard, and he would definitely be killed by the dagger. Unexpectedly, the Nether King seemed to be prepared. A shield appeared behind him, and it blocked Ching Mu's dagger. Ching Mu's expression changed, and he looked at the Nether King. The Nether King turned his head, and a faint smile appeared on his face. "Ching Mu, do you really think I'm that easy to deceive?" Ching Mu had a bad premonition, and he immediately retreated. However, just as he retreated, the Nether King's strong martial artists joined hands to cast a giant net filled with lightning, and Ching Mu was instantly trapped within it. Only then did Ching Mu realize that he had been tricked. The Nether King looked at Ching Mu, and a mocking smile appeared on his face. "Your acting skills are too poor. I could tell from the beginning that there was something wrong with you. From what I remember, Ching Mu was quite arrogant. Why would he cooperate with me to kill someone?" The Nether King's eyes revealed a cold smile. "Furthermore, you kept asking me to cooperate with you. So, I guess that you were waiting for the best opportunity to strike." Ching Mu's expression was extremely ugly. He had wanted to help his senior, but had instead been captured by the Nether King. "Nether King, if I were you, I would scram as far away as I can. Otherwise, it will be too late for regret." The Nether King had already escaped from Suyu's grasp. Now, he had come out of his own accord. He was really seeking death. "Is that so?" The Nether King looked at Suyu, then at Ching Mu. "What's wrong with you? Why are you helping this motley crew?" Ching Mu shook his head and laughed. "You are the motley crew." The Nether King was puzzled. He wondered if Ching Mu had lost his mind. "Forget it." The Nether King stared at Suyu and said, "Kill him first." One of his trusted subordinates immediately stepped forward. His cultivation had reached the middle stage of the Heavenly Law Master, so killing Suyu should be a piece of cake. However, just as the trusted subordinate was about to reach Suyu, a remnant mark, invisible to the naked eye, instantly shot out and killed the trusted subordinate, turning him into dust on the spot. The sudden change startled the Nether King and the others. What happened? The Nether King was in disbelief. The one who had died was a middle-stage Heavenly Law Master, who could be ranked among the top 4 Nether Kings. However, he had been killed without anyone noticing. Was this a dream? However, Suyu opened his eyes slowly, and there was a hint of anger in them. "You ran away, and I didn't even bother to look for you. I didn't expect you to come looking for me." The time domain around him stopped, and he stood up unhurriedly. The Nether King frowned, and his eyes flickered. He pointed at one of the middle-stage Heavenly Law Masters and said, "You go." The latter hesitated for a moment, then braced himself and stepped forward. He exerted his flame domain, which engulfed Suyu. Suyu stood where he was, motionless. With a flick of his finger, the opponent's flame domain was completely destroyed. Not only that, but the middle-stage Heavenly Law Master was also blasted into dust on the spot. This time, they finally saw Suyu attack. Chapter 2962. The Nether King sucked in a breath of cold air. Even he couldn't kill a mid-stage Heaven Dao Lord with a flick of his finger. Yet, this human before him had done it with such ease. Was there even a need to ask about his true strength? Nether King, I've already warned you to scram as soon as possible. Why didn't you listen?" Qing Mu took advantage of the moment when the Netherworld King's members were distracted to break free from the giant net and escape to Su Yu's side. There was a hint of gloating in his eyes. The Nether King finally understood. No wonder Qing Mu had suddenly changed sides. For a mere human, Qing Mu had gone against him, who was also from the hidden Sky Mountain. It turned out that Qing Mu had already discovered Su Yu's peerless battle prowess, which was why he had prostrated before him. "Senior, please be magnanimous and let me off," the Nether King hurriedly pleaded. Greenwood coldly harumphed and said, "Senior, you have to be careful. The Underworld King is extremely cunning. Don't look at how he's begging for mercy right now. In reality, who knows what he's planning?" With the Nether King's coldness, he should know that begging for mercy was useless. Right now, he should be the same as before. On the surface, he seemed to be delaying everyone, but in reality, he was secretly using some sort of method. As expected, as soon as he finished speaking, the Nether King suddenly took out an activated Dao artifact from his sleeve and threw it on the ground. Bang! When the Doctrine artifact came into contact with the ground, it immediately emitted a shocking amount of thunder and lightning, which weaved into a giant net and enveloped Su Yu and Qing Mu. His intention was obviously to obstruct Su Yu and buy time for himself to escape. "You want to keep me here? Dream on." The Nether King turned around and fled. This Dao tool was a life-saving treasure that the saints had bestowed upon him. If he were to use it in a moment of danger, then even a saint powerhouse would have to resist it for an hour. An hour was enough for him to escape without a trace. "I don't care who you are. Just wait for my revenge," the Nether King said without turning his head. His voice was filled with pride. But right at this moment, a voice rang out from behind him. "How do you plan to take revenge on me? Tell me about it." What made the Nether King's body stiffen and his legs go soft, almost causing him to fall to the ground, was that the voice had come from Su Yu. He turned his head to look behind him and was scared out of his wit. Su Yu was 30 feet behind him. As for the lightning net that could trap a great saint for half an hour, it had been completely torn apart. "Ah, you." The Nether King was horrified, and he subconsciously noticed that Su Yu was holding a 5-colored halo in his hand. Under the effect of the halo, the lightning net was completely destroyed. Su Yu said calmly, "Tell me, how are you going to take revenge on me?" He stretched out his palm, and the Nether King's neck was instantly grabbed tightly. The Nether King struggled with great difficulty. His face was filled with fear, as if he had already foreseen his impending death. Greenwood silently sighed, as if he could already see the Underworld King's neck being broken. However, what startled Qing Mu was that after a long while, not only did Su Yu not kill the Netherworld King, he even put him down and said, "Do you still want to escape?" What was going on? The Nether King was stunned. He thought that he would definitely die. But why did Su Yu sound like there was still a chance of survival? I won't run," the Nether King said hurriedly. Su Yu said calmly, "Then lead the way and find your crazy heart powder." The Nether King was stunned. "Crazy heart powder, it has gone missing. I think it must have been swallowed by the space in the space storage device after I failed to retrieve it. Or maybe it was transferred to another place." Before he could finish his sentence, Su Yu interrupted him expressionlessly. "It didn't go missing. It was stolen." "Stolen?" The Nether King and Qing Mu blinked their eyes. The Nether King said, "Senior, you must have made a mistake. I didn't have the time to retrieve the crazy heart powder just now." Su Yu shook his head and made a grabbing motion in the air. A trace of a trajectory appeared on his palm. The trajectory was very special, and it was extremely obscure. This is the ancestral technique of retrieving objects from space? As a member of the Saint clan, Qing Mu had good eyesight, and he immediately recognized the origin of the trajectory. He was stunned for a moment, and his face gradually became confused. This ancestral technique disappeared with the extinction of the Taihao Saint clan. No one has been able to successfully cultivate it. Wait, there is one person who might be able to. Qing Mu couldn't help but think of a person. He was a legendary existence, and everyone knew him. He had a famous name, and that was the Saint Thief. It was said that there was nothing that he couldn't steal. The Nether King also understood and said in surprise, "Has the Saint Thief been here before?" Recalling that Qing Mu had just encountered a strange wind, he was even more surprised. How is it possible? It is said that the Saint Thief will not steal anything that is not rare in the world. What is my crazy heart powder? How could the Saint Thief take a fancy to it? Su Yu solved the question for him. He touched his back with a slightly sullen face. The sword box on his back was still intact, but the absolute heaven sword had disappeared. "I stole your things to divert my attention," Su Yu said calmly. The Saint Thief didn't care about a bag of crazy heart powder. What he wanted was Su Yu's absolute heaven sword. When he stole the absolute heaven sword, he also stole the crazy heart powder to distract Su Yu's attention. Su Yu only now realized that his absolute heaven sword had disappeared. "The Saint Thief is really fated," Su Yu murmured. In the past, when he was fighting with Gai Tianma outside the star, the other party saw his endless ancestral techniques and thought that he was a descendant of the Saint Thief, who was proficient in many ancestral techniques. Unexpectedly, not long after, the Saint Thief paid him a visit. However, Su Yu was not worried that the absolute heaven sword would be lost. That sword was not an ordinary sword, and ordinary people couldn't control it at all. In particular, there were two resentful spirits in it that had a close relationship with Su Yu, and they would not allow anyone other than him to control the absolute heaven sword. "You should have a way to find the crazy heart powder, right?" Su Yu asked. The Nether King suddenly understood. He thought for a moment and said, "Yes, I have refined the crazy heart powder personally. As long as it is within 100,000 feet, I can sense its scent." 100,000 feet? Su Yu's eyes flashed. "Then stand still." He pushed his palm gently, and a gust of wind swept over, sweeping the Nether King away quickly. In just 2 breaths, he returned to his original place and overlapped with the residual shadow he left behind. However, his face was numb and his eyes were lifeless. Just now, he felt as if he had been pressed against the air and rubbed fiercely. He was almost crushed. "I have sent you around 1,000,000 miles. How is it? Did you find out that your crazy heart powder was stolen?" Su Yu asked. The Nether King shook his head and came back to his senses. He quickly pointed in a direction. "It is over there." Su Yu followed his gaze, and his eyes became slightly deep. "You really know how to find a place. Of all places, you chose to hide here." Chapter 2963. Why did so many forces wait patiently at the foot of the Blood Mountain but did not dare to go up? Did they not want to take the initiative and wait in the Blood Mountain first? Obviously not. The only explanation was that the Blood Mountain was very dangerous, and they did not dare to go up. Therefore, even the great saints were waiting outside the Blood Mountain. How could Su Yu not be in danger? However, he had to go, because the thing that was stolen was the absolute heaven sword. "He really knows how to make trouble for me." Su Yu's eyes flashed with a cold light. He waited here not only to look at the fossil, but also to wait for Mo Heng. Ever since he came here, he had been trying to sense the location of the Great Sickle of 10,000 Calamity but had not found any trace of it. Mo Heng must have thought of a way to temporarily block the Great Sickle of 10,000 Calamity. Now, the God Thief had stolen the absolute heaven sword for no reason, forcing him to leave and affecting his search for the Great Sickle of 10,000 Calamity. "Senior, can you let me go?" The Nether King's eyes flashed. Su Yu did not even look at him and said, "Of course you can, but only if you come with me to the Blood Mountain and find the God Thief." "Into the Blood Mountain?" The Nether King was shocked and said, "No. Senior, please spare me. I know I was wrong." Su Yu's eyes flashed. There was definitely something wrong with the Blood Mountain. Why? The Nether King was stunned and looked at Su Yu in surprise. Senior, don't you know that when the Blood Mountain is fossilized, it is a cursed place? Once you enter, you will most likely die. Even if you don't die at the time, you will encounter all kinds of bizarre events and die tragically. Qing Mu agreed with this point. He said solemnly, Senior, you can't go to the Blood Mountain. Those who enter have never had a good ending since ancient times, and there is no exception. The most famous one is that there was once a 10,000 saints strong man from the Tian clan who forced his way into the Blood Mountain with his incredible cultivation. Qing Mu's face was a little pale when he mentioned it. Later, he came back, but he collapsed after taking 10 steps out of the Blood Mountain. It is said that the 10,000 saints strong man's skin was intact, but his insides were all shattered, including his bones and flesh. In the end, the person who collected his corpse accidentally pierced his skin. As a result, that great sage turned into a puddle of liquid and flowed away, leaving behind only a layer of skin. Su Yu's pupils constricted slightly. The one who had died was not an ancient saint or a great saint, but a strong man at the level of all saints. And the way he died was too strange. Su Yu believed that his abilities were pretty good, but he knew that he would never be able to shatter a person's insides while leaving only his skin intact. From then on, no one dared to venture too deep. They all waited for the fossils to appear before fighting over them, Greenwood said seriously. The Nether King nodded repeatedly. That's right, Senior. Until now, we still haven't figured out what exactly is inside the Blood Mountain. Those who were lucky enough to escape are also tight-lipped, as if there's some kind of taboo. Therefore, Senior, please consider carefully. The Blood Mountain is a place where you can only enter but not leave, the Nether King said. Su Yu pondered for a moment and said slowly, if that's the case, why did the God Thief have the courage to break into the Blood Mountain? The Nether King and Qing Mu hesitated, clearly not understanding. Su Yu's eyes shone with wisdom. The God Thief is a very cautious person. If I'm not wrong, there must be other mysteries in the Blood Mountain. He grabbed the Nether King and said, let's go. No, I don't want to go in. The Nether King struggled and was dragged into the Blood Mountain by Su Yu. As soon as he set foot on the Blood Mountain, Su Yu felt a wave of dizziness hit him, and he almost lost his footing. The strong men in all directions were even more alarmed. What are you two doing? Do you want to die? A great saint strong man who was hiding suddenly rushed out and stood at the foot of the Blood Mountain. Then, several other great saint strong men appeared and stared at Su Yu with dissatisfaction. They obviously regarded Su Yu as the one who wanted to snatch the fossils first. Su Yu turned a deaf ear to them and continued to walk up the Blood Mountain. The great saint strong men suddenly became anxious, but no one dared to set foot on the Blood Mountain for fear of being cursed by the legend. They could only watch as Su Yu climbed to the top of the Blood Mountain and stood in front of a deep pit. That deep pit was the breeding ground of the fossils. Brat, if you dare to do anything to the fossils, we won't forgive you, a great saint strong man threatened. However, his threat was obviously useless, because no one who had entered the Blood Mountain had ever returned alive. All of them had been buried within it. What was the difference between forgiving and not forgiving? Su Yu stood at the edge of the deep pit and looked straight down. His eyes were filled with fear. This was not a pit, but the abdomen of some living creature. At a glance, the stone walls of the deep pit were all wriggling walls of flesh. Blood vessels were clearly visible, and some of them were even bleeding from the inside out. That was why the mountain had the color of a blood mountain. In the deepest part of it, a huge green round egg was beating slowly. It looked like a human womb. Could that be the womb that bred the fossils? However, this method of breeding was completely beyond expectations. It did not look like a breeding fossil. Instead, it looked like a human giving birth. Even the Nether King stared at the womb in shock. He was completely shocked by the scene in front of him. "This is unheard of," he murmured. If he had not seen it with his own eyes, he would not have believed that the fossils were bred in this way. "Where is your crazy heart powder?" Suyu glanced at the bottom of the deep pit and did not find the figure of the god thief. If there was no accident, the god thief should be hiding. The Nether King retracted his gaze and immediately sensed. After a moment, he pointed to the southwest corner of the womb. "It's there." Suyu looked in the direction of his gaze and found that there was a sunken place there. "You step back," Suyu said. He could deal with the god thief alone. The Nether King was overjoyed. He hurriedly retreated, preparing to leave the Blood Mountain. However, just as he ran to the mountainside of the Blood Mountain, the womb in the Blood Mountain suddenly trembled. It spat out a stream of air with residual liquid, which rushed up to the sky. Suyu immediately dodged to the side. The stream of air flew into the air, and then fell down powerlessly. Moreover, it happened to fall right towards the Nether King. The Nether King also noticed it and quickly dodged. No matter what the liquid was, it was best not to touch it. However, at the moment when he dodged, he stepped on an ancient sword that had fallen on the Blood Mountain. The ancient sword flew to the position of his chest and was inserted into the Nether King's heart. The Nether King looked at the ancient sword in his chest in disbelief and murmured, as expected, "I can't escape." Then, his eyes rolled back, and he spat out blood and fell to the ground. The blood he spat out was all black blood. The ancient sword had been inserted into his heart so coincidentally, but the ancient sword had also bred some strong poison, which killed him with a single strike. Otherwise, a mere sword would not have taken his life. Suyu saw this, and his pupils shrank slightly. Wasn't this death too strange? Chapter 2964. This scene made the great saints at the foot of the Blood Mountain shudder with fear. Such a strange and coincidental way of death was truly frightening. When they looked at Suyu, they heaved a sigh of relief and showed a hint of pity. Some even gloated and looked forward to his misfortune. They were looking forward to when the disaster would befall Suyu. Suyu stared at the corpse of the Netherworld King, his heart turning cold. The Netherworld King was not weak. How could he have been killed by a sword under normal circumstances? But it was happening right in front of him. Just as Suyu was on his guard, the residual liquid that fell from the sky suddenly fell on the Netherworld King's body. Creak! The ancient sage Underworld King's corpse was instantly melted by the residual liquid and turned into a cloud of white steam. It turned out that the most dangerous thing was the residual liquid. Suyu immediately retreated cautiously. But just as he shifted his feet, he seemed to sense something and stopped. Looking down, he saw a small emerald-green sword protruding from the ground. The tip of the sword was still glowing, and it looked like it was poisonous. Needless to say, this sword was poisonous, just like the one that killed the Netherworld King. Suyu's right foot paused in midair and slowly retracted, his face full of surprise. Fortunately, she was cautious, or she would have ended up like the Netherworld King. However, just as Suyu heaved a sigh of relief, a slight explosion suddenly sounded. Without hesitation, he leaped into the air with one foot and put up a defense around him. Not only that, but he also used the secret space technique to form a huge space collapse around him. Anything that attacked him would be devoured by the space collapse, unable to harm him. Almost at the moment when he put up his defense, the space collapse around him shook violently. Suyu fixed his eyes on it and saw that a residual liquid had fallen into the space collapse. It quickly melted through the space collapse and dripped onto the ground. Some of it even broke through the space collapse and almost shot Suyu. If he had not put up a defense in time, he would have been shot by this sudden residual liquid. Judging by the fate of the Netherworld King, it would be difficult for Suyu not to die. He looked towards the source and found that after the Netherworld King's body had melted, some of the Nirvana artifacts had not melted in time. However, under the corrosion of the residual liquid, it exploded and splashed the residual liquid. Coincidentally, The direction in which the residual liquid had splashed was Su Yu. Su Yu's back was drenched in cold sweat. He finally understood why even strong men of the level of all saints had died here. He clicked his tongue and carefully landed on the blood mountain again. Sensing the danger in this place, Su Yu intended to leave. However, when he saw the holy pirate hiding in the deep pit of the bloody mountain, he clenched his teeth slightly. He leaped, but not only did he not leave, he jumped into the deep pit. As he descended, he could hear the whistling of the wind and the strong smell of blood. It was as if he had really entered the stomach of a living being. As he got closer and closer to the ground, he felt a strong sense of danger. It was as if Su Yu had aroused the vigilance of some kind of powerful creature, which had erupted with hostility towards Su Yu. Puff, all of a sudden, the uterus at the bottom spurted out another wave of residual fluid, and it flew towards Su Yu. Su Yu was already prepared for this, so he quickly moved aside. The residual liquid brushed past his body and shot onto the fleshy stone wall filled with blood vessels. With a sizzling sound, the blood vessels on the stone wall melted away. A large amount of blood spurted out, dripping from top to bottom, covering the entire deep pit. Su Yu had nowhere to hide. His eyes flashed, and he looked at the place where the holy pirate was hiding. It was the only place with shelter. Without any hesitation, his figure flashed, and he instantly hid in the place that could shelter him from the wind and rain. Just then, the blood rain poured down. Although it did not seem to cause any danger when it fell on the ground, if it fell on a person's body, the consequences could be imagined. However, before Su Yu was safe, a gust of cold wind blew behind him. Su Yu displayed the ancestral technique of the Eagle clan without looking back. A sharp residual mark slashed behind him, and his eyes were even colder than before. "You made me come here, holy pirate, you'd better give me a reason not to kill you." He came here all because of the holy pirate. Clang. There was a muffled sound. It seemed that two different forces had collided. When Su Yu turned his head to look, he saw a mysterious woman dressed in gray clothes. Her eyes were filled with deep surprise. Like Su Yu, her whole body was covered. Only her eyes were exposed, and her true appearance was unknown. Just now, this woman pulled out a dagger and stabbed it at Su Yu. As a result, the dagger was knocked away by Su Yu's ancestral technique. The Eagle clan's ancestral technique? The woman's voice was as crisp as a yellow oriole. There was a sense of déjà vu in her voice. Su Yu turned around, stared at her, and said, "Before you die, do you have any last words to say?" She should be the holy pirate, and the absolute heaven sword was most likely with her. The only thing that surprised Su Yu was that the legendary holy pirate turned out to be a woman, and a very young one at that. The gray-clothed woman's beautiful eyes turned, and she suddenly took a step back. Su Yu was already very cautious in this place. How could he not be on guard against the strange movements of the other party? Without saying anything, he covered his whole body with a layer of space collapse, and he also displayed an ancestral technique. It was an auspicious Buddha's light, which enveloped him. Right at that moment, the space collapse instantly broke, and a snow-white jade-like finger wrapped in the remnant of the ancestral technique pierced through the space collapse and pointed at Su Yu's back. Clang! The sound of metal colliding rang out. The finger attacked the Buddha's light on the surface of Su Yu's body, and it could no longer pierce through. "You have both the Eagle clan's ancestral technique and the ancient Buddha's ancestral technique. Who are you?" A cold voice came from behind. Su Yu turned his head and looked over, and his eyes narrowed. He saw a beautiful woman with an indifferent face and a beautiful jade-like face, looking at Su Yu in confusion. Su Yu's body shook, and the Buddha's light burst out, shaking the woman away. He stared at the woman and said lightly, "It turns out that you are the holy pirate." When he saw the gray-clothed girl, he thought she was the holy pirate. But at this moment, it seemed that this beautiful and mature woman, whose strength was far above her, was the real holy pirate. It was just that she and the girl were in the dark, one in the light, and the other in the dark, confusing Suyu. The absolute heaven sword should be with her. I heard that outside of the 9-star civilizations, there is a successor of mine who is proficient in many ancestral techniques. Is it you? The holy pirate stared at Suyu with her beautiful eyes and said slowly. Suyu was surprised. Aren't you too well informed? The battle between him and Gai Tianmo had not been long ago, and the 9-star civilizations had yet to know about it. But this woman had already heard about it? It was really unimaginable. The holy pirate took a step back and said, "It turns out to be you. Your Excellency, you have great skills. Even Gai Tianmo could die in your hands. It seems that I have stolen from the wrong person." She knew the strength of Gai Tianmo. Since he could die in the hands of Suyu, it showed how powerful Suyu was. Chapter 2965. Suyu stared at the god pirate and said coldly, "So much nonsense. Are you saying your last words?" Another ancestral technique condensed in his palm, and one could vaguely see a claw mark floating up and down in the surroundings. Holy Pirate shook his head. "I only said that I stole from the wrong person. That does not mean I need to fear you." His clothes fluttered, and a layer of golden light covered the surface of his body, vaguely resembling a Buddhist robe. As his 5 fingers curled around, an extremely sharp and clear remnant mark appeared. In terms of the power of the remnant, Suyu was even inferior to it. Moreover, the other party's cultivation had reached the great sage level. If they were to really fight, it would be difficult to say who would win and who would lose. Holy Pirate said, "I thought you were from the Sword Holy tribe, so I stole your absolute sky sword. I did not expect it to be in the hands of an outsider." As he spoke, he pulled out the absolute heaven sword from his spatial storage device. She stared at the sword, shook it, and said, "This sword is dangerous. It will only cause more trouble if it falls into your hands. It's better for our people to keep it safe." According to Holy Pirate, she was not acting alone. She had more than one partner. However, this kind of occupying someone else's belongings with a dignified reason was really disgusting. If you want to steal it, then so be it. I'll even respect you for having some skills, yet you insist on making yourself look good, Suyu said bluntly as he pressed down with his claw. Holy Pirate's face was still cold. He shook his head and said, "You don't know anything." As he spoke, he pointed his finger, and a long snake-shaped mark passed through space and lashed out. The 2 ancestral techniques collided in midair, obliterating each other silently, not causing any damage. In the end, Suyu's ancestral technique was slightly superior. The remaining marks fell on the golden streamer on the surface of the divine thief's body, causing a ripple before vanishing. Without waiting for the holy pirate to speak, her beautiful pupils shrank as Suyu displayed 10 ancestral techniques in a row. Every single one of them was filled with a powerful might that was not inferior to the previous one. Moreover, this was only the beginning. Suyu's fingers did not stop. One after another, ancestral techniques were displayed between his fingers. Holy Pirate was shocked. "Where did you get so many ancestral skills?" The reason why she grasped 7 or 8 types of ancestral techniques was because she often robbed other people's ancestral tombs and dug up the funerary object. However, Suyu had mastered more than 7 or 8 of them. From the looks of it, there were at least 10 of them. "When you go to hell, Gai Tianmo will tell you," Suyu said lightly. Holy Pirate calmed himself down and cast 8 ancestral skills. 4 of them were for defense, and the others were for attack. However, Suyu then displayed the endless ancestral technique. How could the god thief's tyrannical ancestral technique contend against them? Holy Pirate finally felt that things were a little tricky. "Don't go too far. Do you want to disturb the uterus? You should have seen how dangerous it is," Saint Pirate said. It would have been better if she hadn't mentioned this matter, but now that she did, Suyu was enraged. "Then I'll have to ask you what's wrong with your brain, to actually make me come here." As he spoke, His 10 fingers continuously flicked out, simultaneously releasing 10 different offensive ancestral techniques. Holy Pirate took a deep breath, and her scalp went numb. She felt that she was not facing a living creature, but a human-shaped ancestral technique casting machine. Without hesitation, Holy Pirate immediately gave up using her shallow ancestral techniques to contend against Suyu. Instead, she held the hilt of the Absolute Heaven Sword. How powerful was the Absolute Heaven Sword? Even if it was not unsheathed, in the hands of a great saint like her, it could exert the terrible power of the Absolute Heaven Sword, which was far stronger than in the hands of Suyu. She pressed down with the sword. All of a sudden, the seemingly dangerous remnants that Suyu had cast were like candles in the wind, instantly extinguished. See? Don't force me to hurt you. Holy Pirate did not continue to attack, but stared at Suyu calmly. Suyu was calm and even stopped using the ancestral technique. He said leisurely, "Who gave you the courage to hold on to other people's things at will?" Holy Pirate was shocked, but then she felt relieved and said, "Don't try to trick me. I know better than you what the Absolute Heaven Sword is. Except for the Holy Mountain's son, it will not surrender to anyone. You can't control it." "Is that so?" Suyu's lips curled up slightly. All of a sudden, the Absolute Heaven Sword in Holy Pirate's hands shook violently uncontrollably, and it fell out of Holy Pirate's hands. Before Holy Pirate could catch it again, Suyu had already taken a step forward and grabbed the Absolute Heaven Sword. Not only did he take back the Absolute Heaven Sword, Suyu held the sword and thrust it forward, stabbing at Holy Pirate's chest. Everything happened so suddenly that both sides were caught off guard. When Holy Pirate reacted, the sheathed Absolute Heaven Sword had already touched Holy Pirate's chest. The cassoc's golden flowing light was extinguished like a piece of paper. The Absolute Heaven Sword touched his chest mercilessly. With a miserable scream, Holy Pirate's face turned pale. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and his body fell heavily on the uterus. There was a bloody hole in his chest, and colorful divine blood kept flowing out from it. "Master!" The young girl behind him screamed and immediately rushed forward to help Holy Pirate up. Her eyes were full of anxiety and resentment as she said, "Why are you so cruel? If my master wanted to hurt you, she would have done it a long time ago." Suyu held the Absolute Heaven Sword expressionlessly and said, "From your point of view, your master really didn't do anything wrong. But from my point of view, she stole my Absolute Heaven Sword and caused me to suffer the Blood Mountain's curse. Even killing her wouldn't be enough, let alone injuring her." He walked forward with the sword in his hand and said calmly, "Are you ready to die?" The young girl stood in front of Holy Pirate, and her eyes were firm. She said, "If you want to kill someone, kill me first." Suyu's face was expressionless, and there was no pity in his eyes. Fine. He had been cultivating for so long that he didn't have much pity in his heart anymore. What he had in his heart was ruthlessness to get rid of future troubles. In particular, his cauldron had been made public, so he couldn't tolerate a strong threat like Holy Pirate. "Kyr, get out of the way." Holy Pirate gritted her teeth, and her mouth was full of divine blood. She took out a black long sword and stood up. "Go back and tell your uncle that something has happened." "I can't go back, Master," the young girl said sadly. Holy Pirate touched her head, and his indifferent face showed a rare gentleness. "Life and death are common for us. Why should we care about it?" He pushed the young girl away and stuck a space charm on her body. He said, "When you go back, train hard." As he spoke, he was about to activate the charm. However, with a whoosh, the charm was swept away by a space realm and fell into Suyu's palm. Holy Pirate's eyes turned cold. He said, "Your Excellency, do you want to kill me? My apprentice didn't offend you." Suyu held the charm, clenched his 5 fingers, and crushed it into pieces. Chapter 2966. Undress? The girl hugged her chest and shrank back in fear. Her eyes were filled with fear. but when he touched Holy Pirate behind him, he did not dare to retreat. If they retreated, no one would be able to stop this person's murderous intent toward Holy Pirate. "What do you want to do?" the gray-clothed girl asked weakly. God Thief clenched his teeth and scolded, "Shameless! Kyr, don't worry about me. This person is ruthless and ruthless. Your sacrifice won't change anything." The gray-clothed young lady looked at Su Yu anxiously. She was afraid, yet she did not dare to retreat. She asked, "Must you be so ruthless?" Su Yu was expressionless. "How troublesome!" He grasped the Absolute Heaven sword and swung it lightly. The sheathed Absolute Heaven sword drew a sword mark that was neither light nor heavy, and it streaked across the girl's body. Chila, with just the right amount of power, the girl's gray robe was completely blown away, revealing her true appearance. It was a 20-year-old girl dressed in a pink dress. Her appearance was ethereal and elegant, like a wild fairy. She was tall and slender, and her skin was as white as snow. It turned out that she was still a beautiful girl who had just grown up. However, Su Yu's attention wasn't on her beauty, but on her appearance. Her cold eyes were like a melting iceberg, and they were filled with blazing sunlight and excitement. "Kyr, it's really you." Su Yu's voice was slightly excited, and it seemed like he was speaking incoherently. The girl hugged him even tighter and asked with tears in her eyes, "What do you want?" Just now, the holy thief had called out her name, Kyr. Hence, when Su Yu called out to her, she did not react at all. "Su Kyr, why are you here?" Su Yu excitedly stepped forward, grabbed her shoulders, and asked in surprise. The young girl in front of him was none other than Su Kyr, who had left without saying goodbye and gone out to gain experience. At that time, the 8-star civilization had not yet fallen to the fate of being destroyed by the Holy Mountain. Su Yu was worried that Su Kyr had been annihilated by the Holy Mountain. Unexpectedly, not only did she not die, but she also came to a 9-star civilization and became the Holy Pirate's student. It was simply unbelievable. "Who are you?" Su Kyr's pupils shrank as she struggled to free herself from him. In the 9-star civilization, she had never told anyone that her surname was Su. Even her teacher, Holy Pirate, only knew her as Kyr. "Do you know how to read minds?" Su Kyr asked. This was the only way to find out her hidden surname. Su Yu smiled excitedly. "I am your father, Su Kai," Su Yu suddenly said. If he were to announce his identity, then how could he, a woman, acknowledge Su Kyr? As a father, how could he have the face to meet a woman as a woman? "Are you my father?" Su Kyr glared at him in anger. "Don't talk nonsense." Su Kai. Su Kyr was stunned. She was sure that there were not many people in the 9-star civilizations who knew her father and knew her. For a moment, he couldn't help but believe most of it, muttering, "You really know how to take advantage of others. You want to be my father? You." She cast a sidelong glance at Su Yu and said, "What kind of friend are you?" "Su." "Isn't that a woman's name?" Su Kyr's brows furrowed. Su Yu coughed and changed to a woman's voice. "In terms of body, I am indeed a woman." Su Kyr became even more suspicious. "What is your relationship with my father? Are you really just friends?" "Heh." Su Yu glared at her. "What else can we be?" Su Kyr snorted. "That's not necessarily true. I heard from my mother that my father was a playboy when he was young. He was never short of women." She looked Su Yu up and down. "You are so mysterious. I can tell you have something going on with my father." Su Yu had the urge to beat her up. How could she say that about her father? Although it was the truth, ahem. Let's not talk about that. Why are you here? Don't you know this place is dangerous? Su Yu looked around again, his brows furrowed. Not only was he cursed, but Su Kyr was also cursed. Su Kyr blinked and said hesitantly, "Can you let go of my master first? Really, she is a good person. I thought you were from the Sword Saint clan, and that was why those B***starred stole your absolute heaven sword. I didn't expect you to be my father's friend. Can you let go of my master for my father's sake? Everything is really just a misunderstanding. Suyu waved his hand. Forget it. Since she is your master, I will let bygones be bygones. He wanted to have a good chat with Su Kai about how she had survived all these years, so he said, "This is not a good place to talk. Let's leave quickly to avoid being cursed." Su Kai said hurriedly, "Thank you, Aunt Ryu, but we can't leave yet." "Aunt Ryu?" Suyu's mouth twitched and he asked, "Why can't we leave?" Su Kai helped the holy pirate up and said, "Let my master explain. I don't quite understand either." The holy pirate wiped the blood from the corners of his mouth. He couldn't adapt to the sudden turn of events, and he was still a little confused. The person who had almost killed her was the friend of her apprentice's father. If his friend was so powerful, how powerful was his father? Why hadn't Kai mentioned it before? She paused, looked at Suyu deeply, and said, "I don't know your relationship with the Saint Mountain Emperor." Suyu said without hesitation, "Absolutely irreconcilable. The hatred between him and the Saint Mountain Emperor couldn't be washed away no matter how long it took." The holy pirate saw that Suyu was sincere, so he said, "Then, there is no harm in telling you." She pointed at the throbbing womb. "Do you know what this is?" Suyu touched his chin and shook his head slightly. The rumor in the outside world said that it is a womb for breeding fossils, but now it seems that is not the case. The holy pirate nodded deeply. "Yes. This is indeed not a womb for breeding fossils, but a womb for breeding the stone fetus son of heaven." "What?" Suyu's heart shook fiercely, and his eyes became sharp instantly. "You mean, the fossil is the stone fetus son of heaven?" The holy pirate shook his head. "To be precise, the fossil is the stone fetus son of heaven that died in the womb. If it is successfully bred, it will be the new stone fetus son of heaven." This was the first time Suyu had heard of such a theory, and he couldn't help but feel that it was a fantasy. Since ancient times, there had been 10 stone fetus sons, so how could there be an 11th one? Moreover, everyone knew that the stone fetus son of heaven was born in the Saint Mountain. Only the mystical land of creation there could produce a stone fetus son of heaven. "It is hard to believe, isn't it? But it is the truth," the holy pirate said. "In the last era, the human ancestor killed 2 heavenly sons. Among them, Mirrorflower Heavenly Son was seeking reincarnation with his great magical power. But the other heavenly son had to be reborn in other ways." Suyu's pupils shrank. It went without saying who the other heavenly son was. It was the 9-tailed heavenly son. Chapter 2967. However, wasn't the 9-tailed emperor already dead? How could he be reborn? Back then, the stone statue of the 9-tailed son of heaven was shattered by the human ancestor using the mortal life cauldron. It was broken and had no chance of being reborn. However, Suyu hesitated again as he thought about Prince Mirrorflower. Mirrorflower Heavenly Prince wasn't torn to pieces yet, but he used his remains as a foundation to prepare for rebirth, and he almost succeeded. If Suyu didn't have the divine monument of the ultimate ruin, which could restrain it, Mirrorflower Heavenly Prince would have been mostly reborn by now. If the Mirrorflower Heavenly Prince could be reborn, why couldn't the 9-tailed Heavenly Prince? However, a large portion of Mirrorflower Heavenly Prince's body remained. What could the 9-tailed Heavenly Prince rely on? Suddenly, Suyu's heart shook, and he took out an emerald green pearl. The bead released a smooth luster, and there was a faint flicker of spiritual light. What was even more strange was that there was an eye on the bead. It was as if this was not an ordinary spatial storage device, but a living eye. It was none other than the 9-jade spiritual pearl that he had not used for a long time. The true form of the 9-jade spiritual pearl was the eye of the 9-tailed emperor. Back then, the other eye that came from Huangfu had released the first-generation demon emperor of the demon race. The remaining eyeball came from the remains of the nine-tailed emperor. In terms of purity, this eyeball was clearly superior. The stone statue of the nine-tailed Son of Heaven has been shattered into pieces, and only this eye has retained its essence, Su Yu murmured. If the nine-tailed emperor wanted to be reborn, he would need the help of this eye. If you want to be reborn, you'll have to ask me first, Su Yu said calmly, as he put away the 9-jade spiritual pearl. Su Kai'er didn't hear what Su Yu was muttering, so she said, one of the other rebirth methods is this kind of womb. At this point, Su Kai'er said with deep hatred, the Emperor of the Sacred Mountain is willing to do anything for himself. He doesn't care about the lives of the other living beings in the Great Beginning Realm. Su Yu looked at the womb and narrowed his eyes. Are you trying to say that the fossil inside is actually a part of the nine-tailed Emperor's body? Su Kai'er nodded, exactly. Back then, the human ancestor shattered the nine-tailed Son of Heaven, and it no longer had a stone statue body. It could only reassemble its body. This fossil is actually the body that the Son of Heaven of the Holy Mountain condensed by absorbing the essence of the nine-star civilization. She clenched her fists and said, I hate the Sacred Mountain's Son of Heaven for deceiving the common people, saying that the fossil was naturally born by the nine-star civilization. Su Yu finally understood why the Holy Mountain prohibited the excavation of fossils. As it turned out, the so-called nine-star civilization crystal nucleus was actually the body of the nine-tailed emperor. In that case, the so-called curse on the Blood Mountain was most likely related to the Sacred Mountain. Among the 10 heavenly sons of the Sacred Mountain, one of them was proficient in curses. Otherwise, it would have been difficult for such a terrifying curse-shielding fossil to be successfully born. However, it is extremely difficult to successfully nurture a fossil. Most of them fail. Su Kai'er said, even if we exhaust all the essences of a nine-star civilization, we might not be able to produce 10 fossils. Su Yu thought for a while and asked, did the abandoned civilizations outside the Xing River also decline because of this? Su Kai'er said, of course. Any civilization had the ability to repair itself, so how could it be completely exhausted by ordinary mining? This is what the Holy Mountain claims to the outside world, saying that it is caused by too many creatures. In fact, this is not the case at all. Everything is a sin created by the Holy Mountain itself. Hearing this, Su Yu was suspicious and asked, as far as I know, the nine-tailed emperor was destroyed an era ago, and the abandoned civilizations of the Xing River did not dry up in just one era. At this point, Su Kai'er was also a little confused, and she looked at her master in confusion. She only knew one thing about the past, and did not know the other. The holy pirate was silent for a moment, then said, the Holy Mountain absorbs the essence of various civilizations. Part of it is to restore their bodies, but more importantly, to maintain their own existence. Maintain existence? Su Yu's eyes narrowed. This was the first time he had heard that the existence of the Holy Mountain's heavenly sons needed to be maintained. What do you mean? Su Yu asked. The holy pirate said slowly, literally. The Holy Mountain's heavenly sons are not creatures of the Great Beginning Realm. They forcibly came to the Great Beginning Realm and occupied the Holy Mountain. They were regarded as aliens and rejected by the Great Beginning Realm. In order to resist this repulsive force, the Holy Mountain's heavenly sons continue to absorb the essence of various civilizations. This is why almost all civilizations are destroyed. Hearing this, Su Yu suddenly understood, and the doubts in his heart were solved. The 8-star civilizations were massacred by the Holy Mountain every era, and this was probably the reason. Moreover, what is even more frightening is that the 9-star civilization that we are currently in is the only civilization that can bear all of our lives. Once it is destroyed, there will be no place for us to survive. The holy pirate was full of hatred. However, in order to maintain its own existence and regenerate the nine-tailed emperor, the holy mountain's heavenly sons still unscrupulously destroyed the remaining nine-star civilization. The holy pirate looked at the womb, his eyes full of hatred. Therefore, we took the risk to come to the place where the fossil was born, and we did everything we could to successfully kill the fossil in the womb, the holy pirate said. Su Yu's heart skipped a beat. The we she was talking about was obviously not just her and Su Kai, but another group of people. The holy pirate did not continue to speak cautiously, lest their existence be revealed. You already understand the matter. What do you want to do? Do it yourself, the holy pirate said. Su Yu stared at the womb, his eyes revealing a thoughtful look. He remembered that he had once seen a small civilization scattered in the vast galaxy, the Mecha civilization. That civilization had completely transcended the world of martial artists and become an extremely ordinary small civilization, somewhat similar to Earth in the past. However, it was much more advanced than Earth. Now that he thought about it, those civilizations should have been created by the Holy Mountain's heavenly sons, right? The purpose was to create more civilizations that were suitable for the survival of martial artists. However, in the era of low martial arts, it was bound to be an era of collapse of martial artists, and only the weak could survive. Therefore, if there were no accidents, the Holy Mountain might carry out a bloodbath of the powerful creatures in the world, leaving only the ordinary creatures similar to the Mecha civilization alive. However, what was the point of doing that? Su Yu could not understand. The Holy Mountain's heavenly sons had consumed the resources of the entire great beginning realm. Even if they created a small civilization like the Mecha civilization, what was the point? Such a civilization would have such shallow spiritual energy that it was almost non-existent, and it could not provide for the Holy Mountain's heavenly sons to continue to maintain their own existence. Forget it, let's get rid of the womb in front of us first. Su Yu shook his head. The level he stood at was still too low, and there were still many things he did not know. He looked at the womb and could not help but clench the absolute heaven sword. The Holy Pirate Alliance tried to stop him. Wait. Break the womb now, unless you don't want to live. Su Kai nodded repeatedly. Yes, you saw the danger of the residual liquid in the womb just now. If you touch it even a little, you will die. Chapter 2968. Hearing this, Su Yu shook his head. Is there a need to go through so much trouble? He said indifferently, back off. Holy Pirate saw that he couldn't stop them, so he retreated and protected Su Kai. Su Yu waved his finger, and an origin-grade space domain surrounded the three of them. This scene caused Su Kai's expression to change, and she looked at Su Yu in astonishment. Origin-grade space domain? Wasn't this her father's unique skill? But before he could ask, Su Yu held the absolute heaven sword in his hand and slashed it at the uterus. Crash! The throbbing uterus was cut open on the spot, and a large amount of green liquid flowed out from it. Wherever it splashed, the place would be corroded, and even the space was no exception. Su Yu immediately sheathed his sword and activated the primordial space realm, which condensed into a giant lotus net around them. The residual liquid that splashed over corroded the lotus net, causing it to shake. However, it managed to withstand the corrosion and did not break. The Holy Pirate heaved a sigh of relief, and the way he looked at Su Yu changed drastically. Don't tell me this is the ancestral technique you stole from the Space Saint clan. The ancestral art of the Space Sacred race could never be stolen away. This was because the ancestral techniques were all passed down within the bloodline, and only the descendants of the bloodline could cultivate them. When a Space Sacred race clansman died, their bodies would be destroyed by the space domain in their bloodline. Not even a hair would be left. In the Space Saint clan, Su Yu's primordial space realm could only be cultivated by the elders. Where did Su Yu get his primordial space realm? But just as she was about to ask for more details, Su Kai screamed, "Mother!" After the uterus ruptured, A slim and graceful figure stood in the same place, dripping wet. She had fair skin, a slim body, and 2 watery purple crystal eyes on her pretty face. At first glance, she was like a wild elf. Her appearance was 70% similar to Su Kai. Su Yu was also stunned. That was Qin Xianer. The child in the womb was actually Qin Xianer? Mother! Su Kai freed herself from Holy Pirate. She ran toward Qin Xianer. However, just as he took a step forward, Su Yu unsheathed his sword and struck. The cold sword light split the sky and split Qin Xianer into 2. Dark red blood flowed out and dyed the ground red. Su Kai was stunned and shouted, "What are you doing? Why did you kill my mother?" Su Yu lowered his head and said in a low voice, "That's not your mother." Her mother had passed away not long after Su Kai had left. What stood there was just a fossil. Moreover, it was a psychic fossil that could peer into people's hearts. It knew where Su Yu's heart was, so it condensed Qin Xianer's shadow. As expected, when Qin Xianer fell to the ground, her body immediately turned into stone, turning into a broken stone statue. Su Kai-er's eyes flashed with astonishment, and she said in a daze, "This is," Holy Pirate expressionlessly said, "this is the self-protection power of the fossil when it senses danger. It will condense into the darkest person or thing in the eyes of the creatures nearby. Then, it will control the enemy." As he spoke, the Holy Pirate squinted his eyes and looked at Su Yu. Su Kai and you saw the same person. However, this person is Su Kai-er's mother, but who are you to her? Why is she the one in the darkest place in my heart? The speaker had an ulterior motive, and the listener had an ulterior motive. Su Kai-er's ears twitched, and she cast a suspicious look at Su Yu. "Right, what is the relationship between you and my mother? How could the fossil sense that the darkest person in your heart is my mother?" She rolled her eyes and said with a faint smile, "Could it be that there was an ill-fated relationship between you and my mother that ended without any cause? She didn't think that her mother had done anything wrong to her father. After all, the black-robed person was a woman." Su Yu slowly put his sword back into its sheath. His tone was indescribably depressed as he said, "Don't joke about your mother. Su Kai didn't know that her mother was no longer in this world. You are a busybody." Su Kai snorted disapprovingly. She was about to continue asking who Su Yu was. All of a sudden, the crushed stones on the ground shook, then shot up into the sky and flew into the sky. In one of the stones, there was a pearl that was emitting a faint light. It carried all the stones and flew into the sky. Seeing this, the Holy Pirate was taken aback. "Oh no, this fossil has been successfully nurtured. Most of the fossils would die in the womb for various reasons. These fossils were usually snatched away by various forces to absorb the remaining power within them. Only a few were lucky enough to be nurtured successfully and go straight to the Holy Mountain. This fossil was one of the few that succeeded. The rubble that was emitting light was the best proof. Now, it was going to rush to the Holy Mountain." Su Yu's eyes narrowed. "I am here, and you want me to let you go back to the Holy Mountain?" He clenched his 5 fingers, and the entire sky above the Blood Mountain darkened. A pitch-black giant palm of space descended from the sky and slammed down fiercely. Bang! Most of the crushed stones were slammed down, and only the shimmering rubble was still stubbornly rushing upwards. "Humph!" Su Yu pressed his palm down, and the pitch-black demonic palm clenched fiercely. It pinched the shimmering rubble, and pressed it down quickly. Even so, the rubble was still resisting, trying to break free from Su Yu's control and fly to the Holy Mountain. Su Yu walked over and stepped on it. He said lightly, "Do you want to be a part of the body of the Nine-Tailed Emperor? You'll have to ask me first." As he spoke, Su Yu took out the 9-jade spiritual pearl and activated it. All of a sudden, the rubble floated up uncontrollably and was automatically absorbed into the 9-jade spiritual pearl. As the only remaining core of the Nine-Tailed Emperor's body, the 9-jade spiritual pearl naturally had the ability to control other parts. Unfortunately, This 9-jade spiritual pearl had been refined by Su Yu for many years, and it had long been under Su Yu's control. Then, he collected the remaining rubble one by one, without missing a single one. Seeing this, the holy pirate was stunned. Is it over just like that? The holy pirate remembered that every time he encountered a successfully nurtured fossil, there would be an earth-shattering battle, and countless deaths and injuries would occur. Even the lightest battle caused serious injuries to several great saints. In serious cases there were even several deaths. Therefore, a successfully nurtured fossil would never allow itself to be captured alive. It would often take extreme measures at the last minute, such as self-destruction. The consequences of that were extremely serious. However, he did not expect Su Yu to use an emerald green bead to successfully retrieve the fossil. It was unbelievable. "This pearl of yours seems a little special," the holy pirate said, squinting. This man was full of secrets, and he couldn't see through him at all. Su Yu put away the pearl expressionlessly, looked at the empty blood mountain, and said, "Let's get out of here first and get rid of the curse." Although the fossil had been recovered, it didn't mean they were safe. The curse was still there. The holy pirate thought about it and said, "Come with me. We have a way to deal with the curse." Since she had rushed over, she was certainly prepared.